Chapter 211, Charity. Yoryuki held the entry manual in her hands, her expression confused. But seeing that Lynn said nothing more, she lowered her head and began flipping through the pages. Soon, information about the peerage, reincarnation ceremony, blessing system, and world invasions entered Yoryuki's sight. As for the devil identity, she had already known about that through previous communication with Lynn via the devil's summoning. So she wasn't particularly surprised. However, this was her first time learning about the peerage itself. Over 3 million members. Seeing that number, Yoryuki was momentarily stunned. Next was the reincarnation ceremony. Her eyes flickered slightly. They could actually reincarnate others into devils? And also grant a blessing system. Upon seeing the blessing system, Yoryuki's grip on the manual tightened. Unlocking one's potential, awakening abilities, and leveling up infinitely through training and defeating monsters. Wasn't this just like a Hogyaku? Yoryuki's pupils trembled violently, and an intense sense of shock surged in her heart. That meant, as long as someone joined Lin's peerage and reincarnated as a devil, they would be granted a blessing system that functioned similarly to a Hogyaku? Boom boom! Yoryuki's heart raced uncontrollably. She looked at the number of members again. Over 3 million. Gulp. She swallowed hard, her fingers starting to tremble slightly. Those 3 million peerages. Could it be that each one had the equivalent of a Hogyaku within them? Thinking of that, Yoryuki's mind went blank. Her heart trembled slightly. Just one Hogyaku and Aizen Sosuke had already caused endless trouble for them. And now, there was a man who could casually distribute something even more terrifying? She couldn't help but think. This world was doomed. But, she sneaked a glance at Lynn, pursed her lips, and lowered her head again. Even so, Yoryuki didn't dare say anything more. Forget it. Leave such big matters to those stronger than her. In front of Lynn, even the problem of Aizen Sosuke seemed trivial. Thus, she decisively continued reading the manual. Then, she saw it. Invasion of other worlds. Invasion of other worlds. Yoryuki's eyes showed confusion, but she quickly reacted. She jerked her head up, looking at Lynn with a trembling voice. The worlds you invaded, could they be? Lynn smiled slightly. Exactly what you're thinking. Snap. The entry manual fell from Yoryuki's hands with a crisp sound. Hee. Her eyes were lifeless, her body numb. As expected. This world was finished. Over 3 million beings carrying Hogyaku-like blessings, invading other worlds. Yoryuki didn't even want to imagine the consequences. And to think she once thought Lynn was a good person. But, this method of invading other worlds. Yoryuki pursed her lips, feeling a little depressed. Of course. The actual situation wasn't as catastrophic as she imagined. At the very least, the blessing system's growth was gradual. It wasn't as absurdly fast as the Hogyaku. Speaking of which, was this another world? Finally, Yoryuki understood why she couldn't sense any spiritual pressure from Lynn, despite his overwhelming strength. It was a different world. A different power system. Ah! Now was not the time to dwell on that. Yoryuki was losing her mind. If it was left to Soul Society alone, could they stop Lynn from invading this world? She wasn't so sure. Old man Yamamoto. Could he really win? Yoryuki didn't know the answer. She looked at Lynn, opened her mouth, and felt a wave of complicated emotions. Lynn glanced at her and said calmly, "Don't worry. I'm not a bad person. I won't destroy this world." Well, he only intended to control the 3 realms and devour the Soul King. Yoryuki's eyelid twitched violently. Yoryuki sank into complete despair. They hadn't even solved the Aizen Sosuke problem yet, and here came another world-ending existence. So tired. Might as well destroy everything. Yoryuki chose to give up. How about joining my peerage? Lynn asked, seizing the opportunity. Yoryuki froze, blinked, and pointed at herself in surprise. Me too. Lynn shrugged. Naturally. Yoryuki's mind raced. Join Lynn's peerage? She thought about the blessing system, comparable to a Hogyaku. And maybe she could help save the world from within? Besides, if Lynn really wanted her, there was nothing she could do to resist anyway. Ever since she was tied down by the devil's summoning and overwhelmed by Lynn's power, Yoryuki knew she couldn't escape. Moreover, she was extremely curious about the blessing system's specifics. Reading about it wasn't the same as experiencing it. Besides, strengthening herself, and the possibility of exploring other worlds. Why did it sound like everything was an advantage? Yoryuki stood in a daze, stroking her chin and thinking. It really seemed that way? Aside from becoming Lynn's peerage and offering him her loyalty. But Yoryuki didn't object to that. After all, it was impossible to gain benefits without any cost. As a mature woman, she understood perfectly. In fact, Yoryuki even felt the price was too low. The blessing system alone was enough to drive people insane with desire. Plus, the opportunity to explore other worlds. Thinking of this, she looked at Lynn with a strange expression. Are you really a devil? She couldn't help but ask. In her mind, devils were supposed to be evil, always looking to take everything from you for the smallest favor. But this felt more like charity. Lynn. He showed a subtle expression. He somehow felt offended. Yoryuki successfully convinced herself with the list of advantages. Of course. Assuming everything written in the manual was true. But she didn't think someone like Lynn needed to deceive her. If he really wanted her, he could have taken her by force that day. Therefore, Yoryuki decisively said, please allow me to join your peerage. Lynn. That simple? Lynn was a bit surprised at how quickly she switched sides. Especially when he had just told her he was planning to invade her world. He shook his head, feeling a little puzzled about what went through Yoryuki's mind. But, like he said, it would be a waste not to accept her. You should have seen the process of the reincarnation ceremony, Lynn said, pointing at the entry manual still lying on the ground. Yoryuki froze, then squatted down to pick up the manual. She flicked her purple ponytail and grinned brightly. Take off all my clothes, right? Yoryuki spoke without a trace of embarrassment. She was no stranger to stripping. Every time she transformed into a black cat, her clothes naturally fell off. Besides, Lynn had already seen everything before. There was no point being shy about it now. And since she agreed to join Lynn's peerage, her body naturally belonged to him. Yoryuki saw it very clearly. She raised her chin proudly. There's an empty room over there. With that, she turned and walked away. Lynn. Why did it feel like she was more proactive than him? Lynn laughed and followed her. Kikyo and the others exchanged glances. This. He already recruited a new follower just after arriving? Well. As expected of Lord Lin. Maiko felt a little anxious. Could it be? She was going to fall behind again? In a quiet room, the sound of clothing slipping to the ground was clearly audible. Yoryuki stood completely bare, one hand on her waist as she confidently displayed her flawless body before Lin. Lin's red eyes slowly scanned her from head to toe. Her bronze skin was tight and toned, glowing with vitality, while her alluring curves shimmered with temptation. Agility, I0. Endurance, I0. Magic, I0. Class skills, Flesh of Nature. Innate skills. Mimic Cat. Assassination. Flash Step. Instant Coaxing Mode. Shadow Devil. Flash God's Blessing, movement-related actions gain double speed boost. Shadow Blessing. Devil Transformation, Flash Realm. Development Abilities. Knight's Favor, B, all stats increase by 20% under moonlight. Lin took one glance at Yoryuki's status screen and copied the data down. Then, without warning, he gave her firm backside a sharp slap. That's enough. Yoryuki's body flinched reflexively. She hadn't expected him to strike her. She bit her lip and threw Lin a side glance, then looked down to read the status message herself. Still, if one looked closely, they could see that her eyes seemed slightly dazed. As if her heart was floating somewhere far away. Her pulse raced, and a burning sensation lingered on her backside. She couldn't focus. She also realized something: this body of hers still had quite the charm to Lin. Otherwise, that slap wouldn't have landed. Waves surged within her heart. After a few minutes, she managed to calm down and focused fully on her newly granted status. Yoryuki studied the information from top to bottom with great seriousness. She finally stopped at the section labeled Innate Skills. The listed skills didn't particularly draw her attention. After all, most of them were just systemized representations of abilities she already possessed. In fact, she had far more skills than what was shown. Her gaze continued downward, and finally settled on the skill Shadow Devil. This is an additional ability gained from reincarnating as a devil? Yoryuki narrowed her eyes, then acted on instinct. Flash Step. Buzz. In the blink of an eye, Yoryuki's figure vanished like a shadow skipping through space, instantly reappearing behind Lin. She paused, eyes flashing with surprise. This speed. Far beyond her previous limits. Her flash step had already been unmatched across the entire Soul Society. But now, it had been enhanced even further? Flash God's Blessing. This buff was insanely powerful. Yoryuki clicked her tongue lightly and studied the details more carefully. Threefold increase. And no restrictions? Damn. While the skill itself sounded simple, its potential was monstrous. And this was just in her normal state. If she activated instant coaxing mode. TCH. Unfathomable speed. A flicker of excitement danced in her eyes. With this, doesn't it mean she can beat up anyone she wants in Soul Society? Well, Maybe not old man Yamamoto just yet. Yet. Let's not count him for now. Even though her power had been boosted, Yoryuki still didn't feel confident in facing Yamamoto Genryusai Shijikuni. After all, that old man's strength had been honed for thousands of years. Temporarily shelving the thought of yanking his beard, Yoryuki continued to examine her internal changes. The shadow devil effect was powerful, but that wasn't what caught her attention the most. She clenched her fists, feeling a lightness deep within her core. The strength that had been stagnant was growing again. What stood out most was the rising spiritual pressure. It was a slow climb, but unmistakable. Moreover, besides spiritual pressure, there was also another unfamiliar energy coursing through her body. It had to be that devilish power? The magic displayed under the blessing system? Yoryuki raised her finger. Whoosh! A faint golden stream of magical energy flickered into existence. She stared at this power, so clearly distinct from spiritual pressure, with curiosity. She wanted to study the difference firsthand. Elsewhere, while Yoryuki was still exploring her body's changes, Lynn was also summarizing the gains he'd made from bringing her into his peerage. The invasion level of the world of the Soul Reapers had increased. But only slightly. In the space of the evil piece, a new slot had been created specifically for Yoryuki's piece. And for now, hers stood alone. He suspected this was a dedicated area for those from the Soul Reaper world. With that thought, several figures flashed through his mind. Matsumoto Rangiku, Kokiki Rukia, Inu Orium. Yet, there really were a lot of top-tier individuals in the Soul Reaper world. It felt like his peerage was about to experience another round of powerful recruits. Of course, it wasn't like he could gather 3 million members overnight like he had in the Black Bullet world. However, in terms of quality, the peerage members from the Soul Reaper world were outstanding. Thinking this over, Lynn returned to evaluating his gains. The biggest gain was probably the complete inheritance of the Soul Reaper's power system, such as Zanjutsu, Hakuda, Kido, and Shunpo. While it might not boost him much directly right now, for his peerage, it was another powerful set of skills to master. A little while later, when Urahara Kisuke saw Yoryuki and Lynn emerge from the same room, a flicker of surprise flashed through his eyes. Then, his eyes narrowed sharply. Yoryuki's aura had changed. What did they do in there? Yoryuki caught the subtle look of inquiry in Kisuke's gaze. A mischievous glint flashed in her eyes as she smirked. Then, flash step. With the shadow devil boost, her speed showed no visible warning as she disappeared instantly. Kisuke's pupils shrank, then he suddenly felt a hand land firmly on his shoulder. Kisuke. Yoryuki's speed had increased again. But she couldn't do this just 2 days ago. Was it because of Lynn? Kisuke instinctively made the connection. What exactly happened during the time Yoryuki and Lynn were alone together? Yoryuki, satisfied by the stunned look on Kisuke's face, gave a smug smile. Then she asked, Kisuke, is the Garganta to Hueco Mundo open? Kisuke paused, a strange expression flickering on his face. You. Why are you suddenly asking about that? Obviously. Now she was one of Lynn's peerage members. Kisuke didn't quite understand, but a bad feeling started to form in his chest. Could it be, this woman with the bold brows had really betrayed the organization? He shook his head and replied, same as before. The Garganta is already open. Then he looked at Lynn and hesitated slightly. So? Lynn's expression remained calm as he replied, in that case, let's go. Whoosh! A gust of wind blew by, stirring a long trail of yellow sand. In the silence of this world, a crack appeared out of nowhere. Crack! The sound was sharp and brittle, like glass shattering. In the next moment, blackness spread out like a curtain, covering the space. Step! A foot emerged from within. Then, Lynn stepped out. He looked up, taking in the scenery before him. What met his eyes was a desolate land, a white desert scattered with dead quartz-like trees. Strange creatures wandered the terrain at a slow, eerie pace. Lynn looked skyward. A crescent moon hung in the sky, marking time in this place. However, according to what he knew, there was no concept of day in Hueco Mundo. He took a deep breath and immediately felt a sense of satisfaction within his body. It was due to the feedback from Yoryuki's spiritual pressure, allowing him to absorb spirit particles from the atmosphere. And in Hueco Mundo, the density of spirit particles far surpassed that of the human world. Even Soul Society lagged behind. If members of his peerage could absorb spiritual particles, just standing here might be enough to raise their overall capabilities. Unfortunately, aside from Yoryuki, the only ones currently capable of utilizing Reishi were probably Maiko and Midoriko. After all, one was a spirit seer devil, and the other, a soul specialist. While Lynn was assessing the environment of Hueco Mundo, figures gradually stepped out of the black cavity behind him. Maiko inhaled deeply, and rich spiritual energy surged into her body along with her breath. Maiko. She scratched her cheek, slightly confused. It felt like she was absorbing souls? Wasn't this incredible? Her eyes lit up. This place was paradise for her. Midoriko extended her hand. A faint light gathered at her fingertips, and she lightly swiped through the air. Buzz. A bow and arrow formed from spiritual particles appeared instantly. Seeing this, Midoriko fell into deep thought. Her innate ability was control over souls. In her original world, this talent only allowed her to extract souls, creating effects similar to the Shiken Jewel. But here, it felt like she was in her natural element. Especially in this place. The spirit particles were so dense she could do things with ease that had once seemed impossible. Like the bow before her. She had merely manipulated the nearby spirit particles lightly to form it. Like a fish in water. That was the phrase that came to mind. No wonder Lynn said this world suited her and Maiko best. Through this world, perhaps she and Maiko could truly evolve. Woohoo! Yuako floated in midair, eyes closed slightly, arms spread wide with a peaceful expression. As a ghost, she loved environments like this. It felt like she was soaking in a spiritual hot spring. However, only Maiko, Midoriko, and Yuako truly understood that sensation. Others, like Kikyo, were largely indifferent. Kikyo looked around before fixing her eyes on some of the strange monsters nearby. Those are hollows. Lynn nodded. Yeah. But most of them are ordinary hollows. Not very strong. He glanced at them with little concern. In terms of threat level, these ordinary hollows were probably even weaker than low-class devils. Hannah's eyes lit up, rubbing her hands together. Let me try first. As she spoke, life energy erupted from her body. She surged forward like a golden comet, resembling a supersun enveloped in golden aura. In the next moment, a golden flash cut through the sky as Hannah launched herself like an arrow. Soon after, the hollow felt a surge of heat, and before it could react, Hannah stood right before it. Hollow. Its eyes froze. It just stood there, dazed. Hannah waved enthusiastically. Hi there, Mr. Hollow. Maiko. Holding her chin, she sighed. Hannah, ordinary hollows don't have intelligence. Hi. Hannah tilted her head, confused. Really? Maiko's expression twitched. She definitely wasn't paying attention during the briefing. But then again, this was Hannah. Maiko could only smile helplessly. Ya. Just then, the hollow finally reacted, roaring as it lunged at Hannah. Zzzt. The moment its claws touched her golden aura, its body ignited instantly. In the next second, it was completely burned away by golden flames, its soul purified. Hi. Hannah scratched her head in confusion. What just happened? Where did Mr. Hollow go? Maiko. Lynn's mouth twitched slightly. What had she even learned during this time? Still, there was some gain. At the very least, they confirmed that ordinary hollows posed no threat. Lynn said, let's move forward. Elsewhere. In the human world. After watching Lynn and the others disappear into the black cavity one by one, Urahara Kisuk finally turned to Yoryuki. You and that man. What exactly happened? Yoryuki smirked, gave a thumbs up, and said, as expected of Kisuk. Sharp as always. Urahara's expression stiffened. You're not even trying to hide it, are you? Her performance had been too obvious. Given his intelligence, how could he not notice? Yoryuki shrugged. I'm not sure I can tell you the specifics. After all, she had only just joined Lynn's peerage. She wasn't fully familiar with all the rules yet. But, you saw my speed earlier. Urahara's eyes gleamed. That was because of him. Exactly. Yoryuki nodded. My strength got a major boost. Urahara narrowed his eyes. He knew full well how strong Yoryuki was. And he also knew she had been at a bottleneck for a long time. But now, things had clearly changed. Still, he asked bluntly, so you sold yourself to him? Yoryuki nodded calmly. Yep. Urahara. Wait. He was just joking. Did she really do it? His face twitched subtly. Oh, right. Yoryuki added with a smirk in her eyes, maybe I should tell you. Right now, it's like I've got a complete Hogyaku in me. Urahara's head shot up. What did you just say? Oh my. Yoryuki grinned. It's rare to see you make that face. Urahara ignored the teasing, his expression turning serious. Yoryuki, this is about the Hogyaku. Don't joke like that. Hearing this, Yoryuki's smile faded. Kisuk, I'm not joking. When she first learned about the blessing system, she was just as shocked. And the blessing system might even be more terrifying than the Hogyaku. Its versatility was beyond imagination. Upon confirming her sincerity, Urahara fell silent. Though Yoryuki hadn't spelled it out, Urahara had already pieced most of it together based on what she said. At the very least, the Hogyaku she mentioned must have come from Lynn. But, just because she sold herself, Lynn gave her something that important? Match made in heaven? Urahara looked at Yoryuki with growing suspicion. Yoryuki's mouth twitched. I get the feeling you're thinking something shady. Urahara's face remained neutral. You're imagining things. She rolled her eyes. I probably know what you're thinking. But, unlike your Hogyaku, Lin's version is something he can create at will. Urahara froze. Create at will? Wait a second. He asked stiffly, don't tell me, all the women around him. Yoryuki nodded. It's just like you think. Gulp. Urahara couldn't hold back anymore. A Hogyaku for each person? The thing he and Aizen had risked everything to create. Was being handed out like candy in someone else's peerage? This. Urahara fell into existential doubt. Meanwhile, in the main world, Himuragi Yukina and Kitagawa Marin had just finished their first experience as new members of Lin's peerage. Marin cautiously shot a zombie through the head. Only when the body collapsed to the ground with a thud did she pat her chest in relief. Her heart was pounding violently. Up until today, she'd been an ordinary girl. This was her first time facing a monster that defied common sense, so it was only natural that she felt anxious. Even though the zombies were easy to deal with, and Mahiru was watching over them from behind, Marin still couldn't relax. Of course. After the fear subsided, excitement and adrenaline quickly kicked in. Compared to her, Yukina was much calmer. After using her new powers on a few zombies, she casually observed the world around them. So this really is a different world. Yukina could confirm now that in her original world, there were no such creatures as zombies. And the atmosphere here lacked any kind of spiritual energy or magic. Aside from the walking corpses, it was an ordinary world. Yukina gripped the snowdrift wolf Schneewalzer tightly, her expression slightly shaken. A real, alternate world. Once she saw that the two were getting familiar with their surroundings, Mahiru said, that's enough for today. Yukina and Marin snapped out of their thoughts. Okay. Before long, the three of them returned to the peerage's residence in the zombie world. The cursed children flying overhead from time to time immediately caught the attention of Marin and Yukina. Marin curiously asked, are they also members of the peerage? Mahiru smiled and nodded. That's right. Marin clicked her tongue in surprise. That's a lot of people. Soon, the three passed through a portal and returned to the Supernatural Investigation Club. Yukina stood silently, her eyes slightly dazed. Just one trip to another world had already shattered her previous understanding of reality. And apparently, there were 3 more gates. She looked at the other portals, curiosity flickering in her eyes. I wonder, what kind of worlds lie beyond those? Mahiru said, the peerage has its own residence. If it's convenient, you're welcome to move in. As she spoke, she shared the location of Lynn Manor with the two of them. Marin asked curiously, do most of the peerage members live there? Most. Mahiru's expression twitched slightly. If the cursed children were counted, then technically, they weren't the majority. After thinking for a moment, she answered, well, there are quite a few. All right. I want to go too. Marin clenched her fists, her face full of determination. The one closest to the water gets to enjoy the moonlight first. If she wanted to climb into Lin's bed, she needed to stay nearby. Though, thinking like that was a bit shameless, wasn't it? Her cheeks flushed slightly at the thought. Still, her resolve didn't waver. She wanted Lord Lin to feel her warmth. Mahiru looked at her with a gentle smile. It seems this newcomer has her goals set clearly. Maybe another comrade has joined. In contrast, then I'll go too. Mahiru looked at Yukina in surprise. From her earlier observation, she didn't think Yukina had the mindset to offer herself to Lin just yet. More likely, she joined for other reasons. So her sudden enthusiasm came as a surprise. Yukina's face remained calm, but her thoughts turned to Sayaka. Even though she was now involved herself, she hadn't forgotten her friend. Even if she couldn't rescue Sayaka, she at least wanted to know how she was doing. Wait. Can't I just ask directly? Suddenly realizing, Yukina turned to Mahiru and asked. Mahiru-senpai, has there been a girl with large breasts and a fear of men among the recent peerage recruits? Senpai? Mahiru's eyes lit up. It was the first time a newcomer had addressed her like that. She was in a good mood. Let me think. Kirasaka Sayaka, right. Yukina's eyes lit up and she nodded immediately. Mahiru asked curiously, you know her? Yukina nodded, a little embarrassed, and admitted, actually, I joined the peerage because of Sayaka. After witnessing Lin's methods and the peerage's strength, Yukina didn't bother to hide anything. She came clean. Mahiru nodded in understanding. You want to save her? Yukina nodded again. Mahiru smiled gently. That's probably not possible. After all, Sayaka was a talented peerage member. Now that she was under Lord Lin, there was no way she'd be released. Sure enough. Yukina wasn't surprised by Mahiru's answer. After all, Sayaka had sneaked in, so she was in the wrong to begin with. Yukina didn't try to argue, but asked with concern, Sayaka, she's... Seeing the worry in her eyes, Mahiru reassured her with a smile, don't worry, her life's not in danger. And... Mahiru's expression turned a little odd. Your friend is receiving treatment for her androphobia. Yukina froze. That can be cured. Mahiru smiled awkwardly. Well, maybe. At the very least. Kurosaka Sayaka was already used to being touched by Lord Lin. Yukina was stunned. That outcome was completely different from what she imagined. Not only had Sayaka not been subjected to inhumane treatment, she was actually receiving therapy? This peerage is too humane. Yukina's image of devils began shifting from the moment she met Lin. Now, after hearing this about Sayaka, that image was completely turned on its head. Not to mention, she was now a devil too. Hearing that Sayaka was okay, Yukina finally relaxed. Then she added, She scratched her cheek awkwardly. I'm part of the Lion King organization, and now. Mahiru immediately understood and smiled reassuringly. Don't worry. If you want to remain with the Lion King organization, you can continue working there. Hi. Another surprise. Yukina was becoming more and more confused. This peerage had way too much freedom? Mahiru smiled faintly. Joining the peerage didn't mean breaking off with one's previous organization. In fact, one of Yukina's seniors, Izayama Yomi, still worked at the bureau in Kyoto. She heard they were doing quite well. All of Yukina's worries were resolved by Mahiru one by one, easing the tension she felt about joining the peerage. Otherwise, as someone who still represented the Lion King organization, knowing all these secrets after joining Lin's peerage had left her with an uneasy conscience. Thanks to Mahiru's reassurances, Himuragi Yukina and Kitagawa Marin left the Supernatural Investigation Club. They were heading back to pack up before moving into Lin Manor. Of course, Marin still needed to convince her family. Yukina, on the other hand, had it much easier. She lived alone and rented an apartment. After returning home and packing her things, Yukina hesitated for a moment before deciding to call Yukari. Moshi Moshi. The call connected. Yukari's lazy voice came through, but... Yukina frowned. Sensei, where are you? It's so loud in the background. Ah. At the Lion King organization. Yukari dragged out her reply, glancing at the courtyard. A man in a white suit with blonde hair stood calmly. Behind him, a massive green snake loomed, gazing coldly at everyone present. Dimitri Vettler, the snake wielder. Yukari let out a long sigh. She didn't expect this guy to show up. As his title implied, he was not only a snake user, but also a complete battle maniac. What do you mean fight first, talk later? He was outright slapping the Lion King organization in the face. Sensei. Yukina's slightly anxious voice called out from the phone. Yukari snapped back to reality and chuckled. It's nothing. Just got beat up by a vampire. Yukina. This is called nothing? Sensei, I'll be there right away. Beep beep beep. As soon as Yukina finished speaking, the call ended with a busy tone. Yukari opened her mouth slightly, then sighed and muttered helplessly, Yukina, you're still as impatient as ever. Not that her arrival would make much of a difference. It was obvious the snake user before her couldn't actually do anything to the Lion King organization. Besides, the organization didn't have the means to suppress a threat like this. But really now, was the Lion King organization supposed to lose to a vampire who wasn't even a true ancestor? Did people really think the organization was that soft? Of course. That's how it looked on the surface. But Dimitri Vettler was still a troublesome opponent. Word was, he had devoured 2 second-generation vampires. No one knew how powerful he'd become. Yukari's expression turned serious as she watched Vettler's every move. Then, a thought crossed her mind. Had she forgotten to ask about Yukina just now? Her thoughts drifted again to Himuragi Yukina. Compared to Vettler, what mattered more was Lin's attitude. When someone far more terrifying loomed above, this so-called crisis lost all emotional weight. Vettler, meanwhile, had clearly sensed that no one from the Lion King organization was taking him seriously. He chuckled. It's been a while since I felt this ignored. But that only made him happy. That's right. If they didn't take him seriously, that just meant it was time to stir things up. Only battle could bring him satisfaction. Utbalaka. With a light command, the giant snake behind him suddenly lunged toward the organization's reception hall. Wherever it passed, icy winds swept through, layering everything in frost. Roar! The snake opened its scarlet maw and let out a blood-chilling scream. But Yukari and the others merely glanced at it, unfazed. The next moment, Buzz. A light blue barrier rose silently. Dot. Boom. Utpalaka crashed into it head first. Hiss. The snake screeched in pain, unable to move an inch forward. It exhaled a breath of frost, and white crystals quickly covered the surface of the barrier. Crack. The sound of freezing was clear and sharp. Yukari flicked her wrist, launching a talisman toward Utpalaka. Swoosh. In midair, the talisman ignited into red flame. A second later, it slammed into the beast's massive body. Foom. The tiny flame suddenly erupted, engulfing Utpalaka's form. Ruoar. Utpalaka shrieked, thrashing wildly in an attempt to shake off the flames. Yukari stared coldly, then turned her gaze to Vatler. Is this how your warlord taught you to greet people? Vatler showed no concern for his burning beast. He simply stared at Yukari with a smirk. I just wanted to see if you're qualified to host the flame banquet. The flame banquet. Hearing that, Yukari narrowed her eyes slightly. So it really was about that. She wasn't surprised. The reason the vampires had found her was because of matters involving the fourth true ancestor. But what she hadn't expected was for the warlord to send this lunatic. Did he not consider the consequences of sending Dimitri Vatler? Or was this exactly what he wanted? Yukari couldn't figure out what the warlord was thinking. Vatler retracted Upananda back to the other world, then raised his hand. Sagara. Upananda. With his command, two more giant snakes appeared. One had a body as vast as the sea. The other was covered in razor-sharp blades. The moment they appeared, Yukari felt a surge of pressure wash over her entire body. The atmosphere grew heavy in an instant. Feeling the oppressive weight, Yukari's expression grew colder. You're still not done. Vatler chuckled with his hands in his pockets. You should know what kind of person I am. He was implying that the Lion King organization had detailed info on him. Yukari exhaled deeply, massaging her temples as a headache formed. Still. She couldn't allow this man to run wild. Her expression turned firm, and with a wave of her hand, a massive shikigami materialized from thin air. It raised its fist and brought it crashing down. Boom! The air exploded with force. Vatler looked up, his eyes gleaming with excitement. That's more like it. With a thought, Sagara and Upananda charged forward. Sagara bypassed the shikigami's strike and coiled around its body. A crushing oceanic pressure descended on the creature. Boom! The shikigami dropped to one knee, sending a shockwave of dust into the air. Bonanda then seized the chance, whipping it with its blade tail. Screech! A deep, jagged wound split open across the shikigami's massive body. Clap clap clap! Vatler clapped. Looks like my familiars are still superior. Yukari didn't respond. She simply raised her hand and touched the air. A streak of golden light flowed into the shikigami's body. Roar! The shikigami howled and rose to its full height once more. It gripped Sagara's body with both hands and began to crush it. Hiss! Sagara screamed in agony. The next second. Crack! Its massive form shattered into fragments, crashing down like a collapsing ocean. Vatler's smile didn't fade, but his eyes grew colder. He clapped again. Buzz! Even more snakes began appearing around him. Yukari raised an eyebrow. You're actually serious now? Vatler chuckled eerily. As long as I don't kill you, it's fine. TCH. Yukari narrowed her eyes. You're seriously underestimating me. Just as she was about to take action, a familiar voice rang out from the entrance. Sensei. Startled, Yukari turned and saw Himuragi Yukina charging forward, wielding the snowdrift wolf Schneewalzer. Yukari's expression twitched as she quickly stepped forward to stop her. Wait. You're no match for this guy. Vatler turned his head, raising an eyebrow as he looked at Yukina with interest. So it was true. A calf that hadn't learned fear yet. But there was no aura of strength. His gaze dimmed with boredom. Still, he raised his hand and said, Upananda. Receiving the command, Upananda shifted its focus and locked onto Yukina with its glowing green eyes. Yukina's expression sharpened. She whispered, Snowdrift Wolf. Swoosh! In an instant, a whirlwind surged around the blade. At the same time, on Upananda's massive frame, a glowing red dot near its lower abdomen caught her eye. Eye of Divine Punishment. There it is. Yukina's gaze locked on the target. She took a deep breath and steadied her grip. Then she threw the snow wolf with all her strength. Whoosh! Wrapped in a terrifying cyclone, the spear burst forth. Buzz! A brilliant light erupted from the snow wolf. The space around it trembled violently. Divine core vibration, critical breakthrough. Yukina didn't hold back. She unleashed her strongest attack from the start. Upananda's green eyes widened in alarm. It instinctively twisted its body to evade, but the snow wolf was far too fast. In a flash, it pierced straight through its lower abdomen. Boom! The area was swallowed in a blinding light. Scree! Upananda thrashed and shrieked, but under the snow wolf's power, it was utterly annihilated. Yukina exhaled heavily, watching as Upananda disappeared completely. She reached out toward the weapon. Whirl! The snow wolf returned to her hand, settling calmly in her grasp. Vatler stared at the spot where Upananda vanished, his expression stiff. He tried to communicate with it in his mind. But there was nothing left. Dimitri Vatler fell silent. He had lost contact with Upananda. That could only mean one thing, Upananda hadn't just been defeated and sent back to the other world. It had been completely annihilated. Dead? Dimitri Vatler's expression shifted slightly in disbelief. Normally, when familiars were defeated in this world, they would automatically return to the other world. But this one hit and Upananda was obliterated without even the chance to retreat? His gaze darkened as he stared at Yukina. That familiar was no mere beast. If it had been the warlord who destroyed Upananda, he wouldn't have been surprised. But this girl? He scrutinized Yukina more carefully, his gaze narrowing. She was clearly a minor character. Was it because of that weapon? Vatler's eyes dropped to the snowdrift wolf Schneewalzer in her hand. An uneasy feeling stirred in his chest. There was something off about that lance. Meanwhile, Yukari was more stunned than even Vatler. Did Yukina really do that? Destroy one of Vatler's familiars in a single strike? Seriously? Was this still the same disciple she raised? Though shocked, Yukari's mind quickly shifted to the more pressing issue, the current link between Yukina and the snow wolf. That technique just now. It clearly utilized divine vibration waves to drive the power of the artifact. But this wasn't the same technique she remembered. It was far too powerful. When had the snowdrift wolf developed such an ability? Doubt flashed in Yukari's eyes. Still, what mattered more was the connection between Yukina and the snow wolf. Just moments ago, Yukina had raised her hand, and the weapon had returned to her like a loyal hound. It reminded Yukari of the artifact's previous wielder, Tuka Fujisaka. Had Yukina now reached the same level of compatibility with the snow wolf? No. Maybe even deeper than Tuka ever achieved. After all, she had just unleashed a technique no one had ever seen before. Ha! Yukari exhaled slowly, her eyes filled with complexity. It had only been one day since she left. Yet Yukina had already undergone such a dramatic change. Naturally, her thoughts turned to Lynn. Had Yukina already made contact with him? Perhaps she had even become part of Lynn's peerage? With that thought, Yukari activated her spiritual senses and looked closer. Then, a devil's aura. She muttered softly. Confirmed. Yukina had indeed become Lynn's peerage member. Yukari's heart thumped. Well done, Yukina. She felt equal parts admiration and relief. Even though Lynn hadn't approached them directly, the pressure his presence exerted on the Lion King agency was greater than anything Vatler could bring. Now that Yukina was connected to Lynn, infiltrating his organization using Kirasaka Sayaka would become much easier. Moreover, Yukari was absolutely certain that Yukina's rapid growth and her strengthened bond with the Snow Wolf were the result of Lynn's influence. But just what had he done? The Lion King organization had trained shrine maidens for years, yet none had achieved the kind of leap Yukina had after just one day of contact. On the other side, Vatler also sensed the devilish aura coming from Yukina. His eyes gleamed with amusement. With a mocking tone, he said, to think the Lion King organization, mankind's top military institution, would collude with devils. Yukari didn't respond. What was the point of explaining anything to a vampire? Vatler didn't expect an answer from her anyway. Nor did he particularly care whether the Lion King organization truly colluded with devils. If this turned political, that was the warlord's problem. He only cared about one thing: tearing things apart. Vatler narrowed his eyes and stared at the heavily breathing Yukina. What he thought was just a harmless little bug on the side of the road had suddenly become a real opponent. You killed my lovely beast, he said in a low voice. You think I'm letting that go? Whoosh! Dark shadows formed behind him. Massive serpentine silhouettes coiled behind his back, surging with hostility. Lovely? Yukina twitched at the word. You call that monstrous thing, lovely? She was speechless but kept her eyes locked on Vatler, tense and ready. She knew she couldn't defeat him. That last attack had drained nearly all her magic. And it had only taken down one of his summons. Behind Vatler, the shadows solidified into forms. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 enormous snake-like beasts stared her down with glowing green eyes. Yukina. She had to admit. She'd overestimated herself. Shuji. Vatler's voice was calm. At his command, a golden serpent rose into the air, then dived toward Yukina like a meteor. Her pupils shrank as she leapt away from the spot with all her remaining strength. Boom! The serpent crashed into the ground where she had just been, sending rocks and dust flying. Yukina raised her arms to shield her eyes from the debris, staring intently at the impact zone. Huff! Shuji lifted its head from the crater, shook itself, and locked onto her again. Yukina's grip tightened on the snow wolf. She instinctively wanted to use that powerful technique again. But... ugh! She groaned, swaying on her feet. She was out of magic. Yukari quickly realized what was happening and tossed her a golden talisman. The moment it hit her, her body lightened. Her speed skyrocketed as she leapt aside, evading another blow from the golden snake. Vatler's gaze flickered. Monas! Roar! Another massive black serpent surged forward. Yukari stood protectively in front of Yukina. Seeing her depleted magic, she handed her a potion. But it wasn't very effective. With concern in her eyes, she said, Yukina, fall back. This battle is beyond what you can handle. It was already surprising that she'd destroyed one of Vatler's beasts. But he had too many of them. Unless Yukina could use that ultimate technique again. But then... to her surprise, Yukina didn't leave. Instead, she shook her head and looked at Vatler. He's already marked me as his target. Exactly. Even with Yukari in front of her, Vatler's attention was still locked on Yukina. Yukari frowned and mocked, what's wrong, Mr. Battle Maniac? Enjoying bullying the weak now? Weak. Vatler chuckled. She's not weak. After losing a familiar to her, he had already deemed her a worthy opponent. Yukari narrowed her eyes, ready to speak again. When Yukina suddenly tugged her sleeve. Yukari looked at her in confusion. Then she saw Yukina pull out a can of milk. Yukari stared at the can of milk in Yukina's hand with a complicated expression. At a time like this, she's drinking milk? Yukina, since when did you develop this strange habit? And... fine, drink it if you must, but why are you blushing? Yukina pursed her lips, eyes fixed on the can of milk in her hand. Her long lashes trembled slightly as her cheeks flushed red. This was one of the perks of joining Lynn's peerage. According to Mahiru, it was a magic recovery item? But... recalling Mahiru's reminder, Yukina hesitated. This, really came from a senior member of the peerage? Her gaze subconsciously dropped to her chest. Her face grew even redder. Do I really have to drink this? Yukina wavered. But... a violent gust suddenly blew past, messing up her hair. Yukina looked up and saw an ocean of pitch black surging toward her like a tide from the abyss. From another direction, a massive golden snake twisted its body, crushing the earth as it charged at her. There was no time to hesitate. Yukina decisively popped the can open and chugged it down in one go. Boom boom. The instant the milk entered her body, Yukina could clearly hear the pounding of her own heart. Moments later, a powerful force surged from deep within her. Her depleted magic was instantly restored. Boom. Magic power erupted from Yukina. Her black hair whipped in the wind as she raised her snowdrift wolf spear without a moment's pause. Buzz. A fierce gale coiled around the tip of the spear once more. This is... Yukari was stunned as she watched Yukina's condition. Magic, it actually recovered? And at such an absurd speed. Yukari looked down at the can of milk still in Yukina's hand. A thought crossed her mind. Could this be some kind of magic recovery item? Her knowledge allowed her to see through the milk's nature in an instant. But, wasn't the effect a little too insane? And... she was certain Yukina didn't have an item like this before. Lynn. The name flashed in Yukari's mind. Then she recalled the Lynn group that specialized in extraordinary items. Could it be? This was one of their products? With that thought, Yukari had the sudden urge to place an order. If every member of the organization had one of these cans, it could literally save lives during emergencies. Keeping that in mind, Yukari turned her focus back to the battlefield. She had no intention of letting Yukina handle both familiars alone. But... her offensive capabilities weren't suited to killing familiars with one strike. Her role leaned more toward support. So... Yukari lightly tapped the air with her index finger, forming a golden, obscure incantation that shot into Yukina's body like an arrow. Yukina flinched, then suddenly felt the quality of her magic surge. It was like, she had broken through a barrier within herself. Yukina's mind sharpened. The cyclone at the tip of the snowdrift wolf suddenly expanded. Descendant of Suani and high-ranking sword sorceress, hear my call. Dawnbringer of devil slaying, Snow Cloud's divine wolf, wield your steel and help me destroy these evil gods and devouring demons. She subconsciously chanted the incantation for Snowdrift Wolf's attack. Buzz. In an instant, the spear flared even brighter than before. Dimitri Vatler narrowed his eyes, instinctively feeling a surge of fear toward the light. Just Monas and Shuji may not be enough. Dimitri immediately shouted, Drakshaka, Nanda. As the words fell, the two massive snakes behind him opened their eyes, which gleamed with eerie light. Green and purple beams shot from their eyes and mouths. Yukari quickly stepped forward and deployed a barrier. Boom. The green and purple beams twisted into a spiral and slammed into the barrier. Buzz! The barrier groaned and trembled violently under the pressure. But, despite the intensity, Yukari remained calm. Yukina, meanwhile, was focused on the two attacking snakes. Top of the head and lower jaw? Using her eye of divine punishment, Yukina locked onto the weak points of both familiars, then launched herself with a powerful push from her feet. Swoosh! Without warning, she vanished. A split second later, Yukina reappeared above the black snake's head. Without hesitation, she stabbed the snowdrift wolf down into its skull. At the same time, she activated the spear's special ability. Divine Resonance Vibration Technique. Facing two familiars at once, Yukina didn't waste magic. She used Divine Core Vibration Critical Breakthrough precisely. Not to mention, with Lynn's boost and Snowdrift Wolf's enhancements, even if she couldn't kill it outright, she could at least deliver serious damage. And she had targeted its weak point. Roar! The black snake let out a pained roar as its massive body slammed to the ground. Seeing that, Yukina turned toward the golden snake. Its lower jaw wasn't as easy to hit as the top of its head. So, she used the same tactic, throwing the snowdrift wolf like a javelin. But the golden snake was agile. It shook its head and dodged the strike. A trace of arrogance flashed in its eyes. But the next second, the spear reappeared in Yukina's hands. She flung it again without hesitation. Golden snake! Not gonna play fair? It instinctively tried to dodge again, but Yukina preemptively activated Divine Core Vibration, distorting space around the spear. Whoosh! Like it was equipped with thrusters, the spear's speed surged dramatically. Slick! This time, the golden snake failed to react in time. The spear pierced straight through its jaw. Hiss! Its eyes turned bloodshot as it shrieked, its massive body collapsing backward. Witnessing this, Yukina exhaled in relief. Even she hadn't expected to wield her new power so skillfully on the first try. She could actually control it with such precision. This time, she used Divine Core Vibration Critical Breakthrough efficiently, not only conserving magic but also greatly increasing the spear's speed. Of course, its power wasn't on par with a full-on breakthrough. That much was clear from the fact that the two giant snakes, though injured, were still alive. But Yukina didn't mind. She needed to conserve magic for what mattered most. Her gaze shifted toward Dimitri Vatler. If they didn't take him down soon, who knew how many more beasts he could summon? She understood the principle of cutting off the head of the enemy. At the same time, in the organization's meeting room, Shirano Kuriki and Koyomi Shizuka watched the battlefield unfold. Are we really just going to keep watching? Koyomi's tone was calm. With her strength, she could probably end the battle. But, keep watching. Shirano's voice held a trace of anticipation. She hadn't expected Yukina to return so suddenly. Even more surprising was the power Yukina now displayed. Why? Shirano was curious. Meanwhile, in the Soul Reaper's world, Hueco Mundo, Maiko and the others were still exploring the vast wastelands. Lynn wasn't particularly interested and just observed their movements through his evil pieces. This was a newly unlocked ability after he became a transcendent. It allowed him to observe each peerage member through their evil piece. For example, at the moment, the view before Lynn showed Maiko's group. But that wasn't all. Using the evil pieces, Lynn could also teleport to any of his peerage members. Even across worlds. As he was watching Maiko and the others, Yukina's evil piece flickered slightly, drawing his attention. He nodded, and a virtual screen opened to his right. The image showed Yukina and the current battlefield. This is... Lynn narrowed his red eyes. He had some memory of the person opposing Yukina. If he remembered correctly, it was that vampire who showed up frequently. As he thought about it, Yukina's image on the screen suddenly shifted. Her long black hair turned snow-white. Her pupils glowed silver like the snowdrift wolf's tip. A chain engraved with runes wrapped around her neck. Lynn's crimson gaze narrowed. Devil transformation. Lynn stroked his chin, eyes gleaming with interest. This was the first time he'd seen a peerage member achieve devil transformation as quickly as Himuragi Yukina. He glanced at another screen, and seeing nothing unusual happening with Kikunoho and the others, he turned his focus back to Yukina. Main world. Himuragi Yukina's white hair fluttered as the snowdrift wolf Schneewalzer in her hand vanished. Behind her, a pair of metallic wings, formed by spells, shimmered faintly into view. The wings flapped gently, leaving traces of divine light in their wake. Everyone present was stunned by the sudden transformation. Yukina. Yukari, still maintaining the barrier to block the beam attack, paused, her gaze filled with shock. This. A faux angel. Yukari and Shirano Kuriki exclaimed almost in unison from two different locations. This form of Yukina was far too familiar. The former wielder of the snowdrift wolf, Fujisaka Fuyaka, had become a faux angel and ascended after absorbing too much divine power. Now, Was the new wielder of the Snowdrift Wolf repeating that path? But wasn't this a bit too fast? No. Koyomi Shizuka pushed her glasses up, a strange light flashing in her eyes as she stared intently at Yukina. It looks very similar to a faux angel, but if you look closely, there are differences. Yukina's current state wasn't quite the same as Fujisaka Fuyaka's. And more importantly, Koyomi said in a serious tone, don't forget, Himuragi Yukina has been infected with devil blood. Shirana calmed down upon hearing that. That's right. The current Yukina had already become a devil. It was practically impossible for her to become an angel. But then what was going on? Even if this was just a faux angel state, appearing on a devil was completely unnatural. For angels, wouldn't this be considered blasphemy? If they knew about it, wouldn't they bring down divine judgment? Shirana was a little uneasy. And more than that, she couldn't understand something. How did Yukina undergo such a drastic transformation just by joining Lynn? Ha! Shirana let out a long breath, suppressing her chaotic thoughts. Whatever was happening, watching would eventually reveal the truth. Besides, she also wanted to see just how far Yukina could go in this form. Elsewhere, Yukari looked worried and muttered, Yukina. Yukina's angelic appearance made her worry that the girl might ascend to heaven at any moment. Although being an angel didn't sound like a bad thing. But from what she knew, the situation in heaven wasn't exactly ideal right now. Even their belief system was shaky. You could imagine the headaches they were dealing with up there. Thankfully, Yukari remembered that Yukina was now a devil. She likely couldn't ascend, and heaven might not even recognize her. That thought allowed her to fully relax. But her expression grew strange. A devil with a faux angel characteristics. Was that even possible? And where was the Snowdrift Wolf? Only now did Yukari notice the key detail in Yukina's transformation. With the precedent of Fujisaka Fuyaka, it should have taken an excessive amount of divine energy for Yukina to reach this form. But Yukina showed no signs of absorbing divine energy. Not only that, the Snowdrift Wolf was gone. A thoughtful look appeared in Yukari's eyes. Yukina's current state. Was it really that of a faux angel? Yukari remained skeptical. Additionally, her gaze locked onto the golden wings behind Yukina. Wisps of divine aura floated through the air, while obscure runes glowed across the wings like flowing streams. Within them, Yukari faintly sensed the traces of the divine resonance vibration technique. But it was clearly a far more evolved version. Seeing such a form for the first time, Yukari was completely lost. Near the golden snake. Faux angel. Hearing Yukari's earlier exclamation, Yukina frowned in confusion. Angel? She was on full alert, amber eyes scanning her surroundings. She was a devil now. Having accepted her new identity, Yukina remained wary toward anything angelic. But Yukina. She didn't see any sign of an angel? A bit baffled, she shook her head. Forget it. She turned her full attention back to Dmitri Vatler, her expression serious. After undergoing devil transformation, she felt more than 10 times stronger than before. She lightly clenched her fists and a surge of explosive strength coursed through her hands. This feeling was truly intoxicating. Yukina's eyes dazed for a moment, then refocused. And the Snowdrift Wolf had fused with her. The silver glow in her eyes and the metal wings on her back were proof of the Snowdrift Wolf's presence. Now she could do things she never could before. But this state couldn't last long. She needed to finish this quickly. With that thought, Yukina narrowed her eyes and locked onto Dmitri Vatler. Under her gaze, the pressure around him dropped sharply. He paused, then grinned, eyes gleaming with excitement. Well now. This is getting more and more fun. As soon as the words fell, Yukina vanished, leaving only a fiery trail in her wake. Buzz. Like crossing through space, she appeared behind Dmitri Vatler and lashed out with a powerful kick. Slick. The air tore, and the shadow of the Snowdrift Wolf flickered faintly at Yukina's toes. Bang! A sharp thud rang out. Dmitri Vatler was blasted backward, but Yukina frowned. In front of her, the shadow of a snake gradually faded away. Another familiar had taken the blow for him, nullifying the damage. Just how many familiars does this vampire have? In the distance, Dmitri lightly tapped down, landing like a feather. He smiled with a sigh of relief. That was close. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the silver aura swirling around Yukina. So cool. Dmitri stiffened slightly. If it were him, he'd definitely be on edge right now. Sure, he loved battle. But that didn't mean he loved dying. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Roar! The golden and purple snakes responded immediately, their massive bodies coiling together. Hiss! Hissing filled the air. Next moment, gold and purple fused. Roar! A thunderous roar shook the sky. Violent gusts swept the battlefield. Then, a two-headed beast over 100 meters long appeared. Its left head was a massive dark purple snake with two dragon-like horns. Its right head was a black serpent clad in liquid metal scales, its tail wrapped in annihilation mist. An overwhelming pressure surged from the beast, weighing on everyone's hearts. Haha, how about that? Dimitri laughed wildly, arms spread wide. My masterpiece, Shakira. Beautiful, isn't it? He continued laughing, clearly delighted. Tisk. Yukari clicked her tongue in annoyance. This snake charmer really didn't hold back. And those others were just watching? She was starting to get irritated. Yukina raised her gaze toward the 100-meter, two-headed serpent, her fists clenched tightly. She took a deep breath, her eyes becoming sharp and resolute. Buzz. A blinding silver light shot skyward. Spiritual energy erupted around her. In the next moment, the colossal shadow of the snowdrift wolf coalesced behind her. Without any hesitation, Yukina raised her arms high. Then hurled the snowdrift wolf's shadow straight at the beast. Slick. The moment the massive shadow of the snowdrift wolf was hurled forward, Yukina chanted in a low voice. Using thousands of prayers as a blade, I will pierce through the impure world, destroy it. As soon as the words left her mouth, the space trembled violently. Wherever the snowdrift wolf's shadow passed, the fabric of space cracked audibly, revealing pitch-black voids. The two-headed serpent sensed the threat instinctively, twisting its massive body in an attempt to evade the attack. But an overwhelming force locked it in place, leaving it completely immobile. Dimitri Vettler looked up, his golden hair tossed about by the roaring wind, and narrowed his eyes slightly. Spatial lock. Surprise flickered in his gaze. This technique was actually pulled off by such a young witch? He was genuinely stunned. Are all the high schoolers this terrifying? Was he getting old? Or is the talent in this region simply out of this world? Why was there never anyone of this caliber in the warlord's domain? The shadow of the snowdrift wolf pierced straight through the enormous body of the two-headed serpent. Crack! Spiderweb-like fractures spread rapidly across its entire form. Boom! The creature shattered instantly, dispersing into a dazzling swirl of purple and green particles. Ha! Yukina gasped and collapsed to the ground, her devil transformation state lifting immediately. That last attack had exhausted everything she had. Now, she didn't even have the strength to stand. Dimitri Vettler stood in silence. The connection between him and his familiars had been severed again. Clearly, these two beasts were completely destroyed. He had only been here for a short time and had already lost 3 of his prized familiars. His expression turned sour. He had expected a pleasant outing, but now, all he felt was irritation. Of course, being pushed this far did let him enjoy the thrill of battle. But he still couldn't accept returning to the warlord's domain in disgrace. Just as Dimitri Vettler was thinking this, a sharp hiss echoed from behind him. The next second, dozens of glowing green eyes opened in the shadows. Yukina, still trying to stay alert, froze. 1, 2, 3, 4. She couldn't even count them all. A bead of cold sweat rolled down her temple. Dimitri Vettler grinned, raised his hand, and curled his fingers toward Yukina. Go, my beloved pets, devour her. Whoosh! The moment the command was given, a sea of snakes surged forth from a rift in space. The night was swallowed whole, the moon hidden behind writhing scales. Darkness engulfed everything. Yukina propped herself up on shaking arms, trying to stand, but her legs faltered. She couldn't move. And even if she could, she raised her eyes to the wave of snakes overhead. Where could she even run? As a mid-class devil, it was already hard enough going toe-to-toe with someone like this. Yukina bit her lip, eyes filled with unwillingness. If only she had met Lynn sooner, joined his peerage earlier, and received the blessing system sooner. Would today be different? Her thoughts drifted as regret flickered across her face. If she had more time, and the system at her side, she was confident she could quickly become a high-class devil. Yukina. Yukari instinctively tried to rush over, but she was forced to raise her hand and erect a barrier. Bang! Snakes collided against her shield in a frenzy. TCH. Yukari clicked her tongue in frustration. The target wasn't just Yukina. At the same time, in the organization's meeting room, Hina. Amid the tense situation, Shirin Okariki blurted out Koyomi Shizuka's original name. Understood. Koyomi remained calm and was about to activate her ability to break the silence. But at the center of the battlefield, the snowdrift wolf beneath Yukina's feet trembled slightly, then quickly stood on its own. Yukina. She hadn't done anything to the snowdrift wolf just now, right? What was happening? Just as she was about to question it, a familiar, yet distant voice echoed in her ears. To already be using devil transformation after just joining the peerage. You've got potential. Hearing that voice, Yukina's eyes widened immediately. Lynn. The next moment, the evil piece on her back began to flicker. Then, Lin's shadow manifested beside her. Hi! Seeing him with her own eyes, Yukina was momentarily stunned. The snowdrift wolf happily circled around Lin's shadow, then leapt into his arms like a spoiled pet, eagerly nudging his hands, practically begging to be held. Yukina twitched at the sight. Hopeless. Why was it always so cold and aloof in her hands? It had never acted like a puppy with her. Even now, as its master, she had never seen it behave like this. Lynn calmly held the wolf, raised its spear form, and pointed it at the incoming sea of snakes. It has good potential, but this is how the snowdrift wolf should be used. As the words fell, buzz! A cold glint flashed from the spear's tip, followed by a ripple-like shockwave that erupted outward from Lynn. A silver arc spread across the battlefield. Zhang! A soft sound echoed in everyone's ears. Wherever the arc passed, the endless tide of snakes vanished without a sound. No cries. No screams. They simply faded away. And it wasn't just the sea of snakes. Yukari's barrier and Koyomi's silence-breaking technique were also nullified in that instant. In a breath, the entire world went still. What is this? Yukina stared at Lynn blankly, the image of his earlier ability flashing through her mind. Return the world to its origin. She had seen it once when Lynn tested it using one of Mahiru's light bullets, but didn't grasp its full power then. But now, she understood how broken this ability was. That endless tide of snakes. Just a flick, and gone. Yukina was dumbfounded. Compared to her divine resonance vibration technique, her core resonance breakthrough, and even devil transformation. Return the world to its origin looked plain on the surface, but it was stronger than anything else she had. But she couldn't use it. Even as the snowdrift wolf's master, she couldn't even access this most fundamental ability. Her expression dimmed with frustration. At the same time, Yukari and Koyomi were completely frozen. Especially Koyomi. Her ability had clearly been activated, and yet, it had vanished without a trace. And not just her silence breaking. The entire battlefield had gone quiet. What is this? For the first time, Koyomi's calm facade cracked with tension. Since inheriting the title of Xiangyang, she had never encountered a scenario where her power failed. Shirana's gaze was fixed on the figure behind Yukina. Her eyes flickered as she whispered. Himuragi Yukina's new master, has arrived. Koyomi turned her head sharply. A figure with black hair and crimson eyes came into view. She froze for a moment. They had been analyzing this figure in detail for the past few days. So he was unmistakable. The room went completely silent. Eventually, Shirana stood and stepped forward. Let us go greet him together. This powerful, terrifying move. The moment she finished, Shirana took the lead and headed toward Lynn. Koyomi said nothing and silently followed behind. Dmitry Vatler and the others could be ignored. But when it came to this move, they didn't dare. Even if it was just his shadow. Opposite Yukina, Dmitry Vatler stood in stunned silence. Where was his massive sea of snakes? Where did they all go? He tried reaching out to his familiars. But gone. All of them. Not a single one left. Was he alone now? Dmitry stood there dumbfounded, unable to accept this abrupt shift. What just happened? They were on the brink of victory. He was about to crush them. But now, he was the one left stranded? His eyes locked on Himuragi Yukina. Then, his gaze fell on the shadow standing beside her. Lynn. What drew his attention most was the spear in Lynn's hand. It was the weapon wielded by that witch, but now, it felt different. Dmitry narrowed his eyes at the brilliant, multicolored glow emanating from the snowdrift wolf Schneewalzer. A strange, unsettling feeling crept into his chest. His instincts screamed that the disappearance of the snake sea was tied to the sudden arrival of this man and the changed form of that spear. And this man looked familiar. Where had he seen him before? Puzzled, Dmitry stared at Lynn and spoke in a low tone, was it you, who did something? Lynn didn't respond. He simply patted the body of the snowdrift wolf. The snowdrift wolf immediately understood and charged straight at Dmitry Vatler. Dmitry Vatler! There was no time to think. He quickly shifted form. Crack! His pristine white suit tore apart, transforming into a massive snake to block the snowdrift wolf. At the same time, Shirana Kariki and Koyomi Shizuka arrived from the meeting room and witnessed the clash. A strange glint flickered in their eyes. The snowdrift wolf. It could be used like this? More importantly, the snowdrift wolf was clearly a weapon from the Lion King organization, so how could a devil wield it with such mastery? They felt a twinge of unease but quickly buried it, rushing to Yukina's side. Shirana, Koyomi. Yukina's eyes widened in surprise when she saw them. Even with Shirana's face hidden by her veil, Yukina recognized her immediately from her distinctive hair and eyes. Wait a second. How did her former classmates end up here, in the Lion King organization? And did they just come out from inside? Yukari crossed her arms with an annoyed expression. So you finally decided to show up. She huffed. You're the so-called three saints, yet you just sat back while my disciple and I fought that monster. Shameless. Yukari cursed them in her heart but didn't dare say it aloud. Ahem. It's not like she was afraid of Shirana's revenge or anything. Definitely not that. Hi. When Yukina heard her master refer to them as the three saints, she was stunned. She stammered, three saints. That's right. Yukari nodded casually and answered for them. These two are part of the legendary three saints of the Lion King organization. Now that Shirana and Koyomi had appeared, there was no longer any need to hide it from Yukina. Not to mention, with Lynn present, secrecy wasn't even an option. Hearing her master's confirmation, Yukina felt her mind go blank. The elusive and mysterious three saints of the organization. One of them was her classmate from elementary school. Her vision spun for a moment. She quickly straightened up and tried to maintain a respectful demeanor. But thinking about how they used to share snacks in school made it hard to hold that expression. Her face twitched uncontrollably. Shirana's brow twitched when she saw Yukina's awkward face. She was also a little embarrassed now that her identity was exposed. But there was no helping it. Shirana composed herself, pretended not to notice Yukina, and turned toward Lynn. I was unaware that Lord Lynn would grace our humble domain. Forgive me for not welcoming you. I am truly filled with regret. She lowered her head slightly, her voice and posture filled with deference despite the veil. Regretful. Lynn glanced down at her with a half-smile. You sent agents into my territory and arranged for Himuragi Yukina to join my peerage. Is that what you call regret? Shirana stiffened. As expected. She had anticipated that Lynn would confront her over these matters. But she had already prepared her explanation. She looked up with a sincere gaze. It was indeed our failure regarding Kirasaka Sayaka. Regardless. Shirana truthfully explained the organization's internal decisions. She didn't lie or make excuses. She simply admitted fault. After all, she had no confidence that lies could fool someone who surpassed even a Mu. Sincerity was safer. I made a mistake, she continued. And I will make it right as soon as possible. So. She looked toward Himuragi Yukina. Lynn raised an eyebrow. So you sent Yukina over to me? Shirana nodded. I heard that all of Lord Lynn's peerage members are exceptionally gifted. Himuragi Yukina is the chief priestess of this generation. I believed she might win your favor. Himuragi Yukina. She blinked, confused. Then suddenly panicked. Wait. Didn't you say I was being sent to rescue Sayaka? Hearing this, Shirana gave her a gentle, apologetic smile. Hidden by the veil, her expression remained unreadable. Yukina turned to her master, only to find Yukari gazing up at the sky and muttering wistfully, the moon is really round and bright tonight. Yukina. Master, it's a crescent moon tonight. Ah. Yukari laughed it off and waved her hands. Why yet. Seeing that reaction, Yukina finally understood. Her master had known all along. So. She wasn't sent to save Sayaka? She had been offered to Lord Lynn from the start as a prospective peerage member? Yukina puffed her cheeks slightly, a little upset. Sure, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Becoming Lynn's peerage member had already brought her a ton of benefits. But it still left a bitter taste. Yukari scratched her cheek awkwardly. Sorry, Yukina. Meanwhile. Shirana continued, as for Kirasaka Sayaka. If Lord Lynn is interested, she can also be offered. Lynn responded flatly, you're quite generous. If he remembered correctly. Yukina and Sayaka were the top two shrine maidens in the organization right now. Still, Lynn didn't care much. Even if Shirana wanted them back, he wouldn't return anything. And more than those two. What caught Lynn's eye now were the three saints standing before him. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, then turned toward Shirana and reached out. He lifted her chin with his hand. Shirana's body trembled violently, but she didn't move. She remained frozen, allowing Lynn to do as he pleased. Off to the side. Koyomi Shizuka watched calmly, her face neutral even as turbulent emotions stirred in her heart. Meanwhile, Yukari, still comforting Yukina, shot a glance at the stiffened Shirana and felt a small surge of satisfaction. Serves her right, after everything she did to them and their disciples. Karma. Shirana's head was gently tilted upward. Lynn stared at the veil for a moment, then removed it without hesitation. In the next second, a delicate and refined face was revealed before his eyes. Lynn nodded with clear satisfaction. Not bad. You're very suitable to become a member of my peerage. Shirana Kariki froze. To become a peerage member? No. She had already sent off Himuragi Yukina and Kirasaka Sayaka. Why was he still eyeing her? But She didn't dare to refuse outright. Shirana forced a smile, but her expression was stiff and twisted. Pfft. Yukari couldn't help but laugh when she saw that. It was the first time she'd ever seen Shirana humbled like this. It felt amazing. But her laughter caught Lin's attention. He glanced over at Yukari, and the evil piece lit up again. You're quite suitable too. Yukari. The smile on her face froze in an instant. Now it was Shirana's turn to enjoy the show. The problem isn't scarcity, it's inequality. Lin stroked his chin and looked toward Koyomi Shizuka. The evil piece shimmered again. Was he recruiting now? Lin felt a little disappointed. Alright then. The Lion King organization really was something else. Feeling Lin's gaze, Koyomi's composed expression almost cracked. She quickly pushed up her glasses to hide her nervousness. Seriously? She even dressed like this, yet he was still eyeing her? And was Lin planning to take the whole Lion King organization with him? Thinking that, Koyomi and the others grew uneasy. They thought things had ended with Kirasaka Sayaka and Himuragi Yukina. But who would have thought Lin's appetite was this massive? Honestly. Even if Lin had saved all of Tokyo, his behavior was still undeniably devilish. On the other side, Dimitri Vettler, still entangled with the snowdrift wolf Schneewalzer, heard the conversation between Lin and Shirana. A certain memory suddenly flashed in his mind. It was a conversation with the warlord before he came to Japan. Lin had been mentioned, and the War King even showed him a photo, warning him repeatedly not to provoke that person. Lin. A cold glint passed through Dimitri's snake-like eyes. He hadn't provoked this man. But if the guy came looking for him, there wasn't much he could do. Also, that shrine maiden girl should be one of his followers. Otherwise, a being of that level wouldn't be after him. So, all of this was thanks to that Miko girl. Dimitri's eyes lit up with excitement. This guy was a true powerhouse. Even the warlord had to be cautious around him. Being able to fight someone of this caliber. Dimitri felt that even if he died, he'd have no regrets. Not to mention, what he was seeing now was just a projection. Could Dimitri really not handle a phantom? But there was still a major problem he had to deal with. A silver flash darted by as Dimitri twisted his snake body to narrowly dodge the snowdrift wolf's strike. After witnessing the sea of serpents being obliterated earlier, Dimitri had a few vague guesses. But he didn't dare gamble on it. What if he was right? Dimitri didn't want to be annihilated like his summoned beast. He had to come up with something. Narrowing his eyes, he instinctively looked toward Himuragi Yukina. A peerage member? He did have a bargaining chip. Molin, you've heard of Flame Feast, haven't you? Dimitri's snake body began to speak in a human voice, drawing everyone's attention, including Lin's. Flame Feast? Lin raised an eyebrow and looked over at Dimitri. So that's it. Dimitri had come to the Lion King organization because of the fourth true ancestor. Thinking that, Lin's eyes flickered. If he remembered correctly, the fourth true ancestor's familiars corresponded to the 12 zodiac signs. That fit quite well with his own zodiac system, didn't it? It seemed getting involved was necessary. Seeing the interest in Lin's eyes, Dimitri gave a gentle smile and suddenly said, Body No. 3. Lin narrowed his gaze and stared at him. I'll transfer ownership of body number 3 to you. How about that for a deal? The moment those words left his mouth, silence fell over the entire organization. Shirana opened her mouth to speak, but quickly closed it again. Trying to influence a being far beyond level would be foolish. She clenched her hands nervously and stared at Lin. Though the specifics of the deal weren't clear, it wasn't hard to guess it wouldn't be something good. Everyone held their breath, waiting for Lin's reply. Only Dimitri was still trying to dodge the snowdrift wolf's relentless attacks. A few seconds passed. Lin looked at the dodging Dimitri and chuckled, a deal. Shirana's breath caught. You think you're worthy? As the words fell, the snowdrift wolf, seemingly done playing around, suddenly erupted in multicolored light. Boom! With a faint sound, space tore open, and a shockwave burst from the snowdrift wolf's tail. Squelch! Dimitri's snake body was instantly pierced through. Scarlet blood erupted violently. Dimitri blinked for a moment before the pain even registered. A cold chill crept up his spine. So fast. He didn't even register the pain right away. Panic surged in Dimitri's eyes. In Lin's hand, the snowdrift wolf had turned into a deadly weapon. Honestly, if the snowdrift wolf hadn't visibly held back, Dimitri might have thought it was some kind of ancient divine artifact. And recalling how the Sea of Serpents had been instantly destroyed, Dimitri couldn't help but grow more afraid. He hadn't even fought a real opponent yet. How could he die here? But despite his tension, nothing else happened. Only blood continued to gush from his wound. Still, for a vampire, it's just a fatal wound. Dimitri was about to laugh it off, but a crisp cracking sound rang out. Click. His face froze as his massive body suddenly cracked like shattered glass. No. Dimitri screamed, no, not like this. To be taken down by a gun or something. No. Boom. As Dimitri let out a desperate scream, his body shattered into glowing fragments and vanished. Hi. Shirana blinked, stunned. She had been wondering if Lynn would accept the deal, and then Dimitri was gone? But maybe that was a good thing? Realizing that, Shirana quickly bowed her head and said, "Thank you for your help, Lord Lin. The Lion King organization will never forget your kindness." Even though she didn't think Dimitri posed much of a threat, since Lin had taken action, she had to express her gratitude. In that case, let's talk about the reward. Shirana. She stiffly raised her head, eyes filled with disbelief. Seriously? Lin calmly said, "I'm very interested in the flame feast." Although she found it hard to fully understand, Shirana Kariki still replied respectfully and without hesitation, "The Lion King organization will compile all the relevant information regarding the flame feast and send it to you later." Seeing this, Lin gave a light hum and then dispelled the illusion. Even though the Lion King organization had no shortage of talented individuals, Lin wasn't in a rush. What belonged to him would eventually be his. As Lin's figure faded, Shirana Kariki finally breathed a sigh of relief. Koyomi Shizuka also adjusted her glasses, easing the tension in her body. Dealing with someone of that level was truly terrifying. But after this event, the Lion King organization. It looked like they'd inevitably be labeled as Lin's affiliates. After all, once the Flame Feast ended, the Lion King organization would be known for helping Lin collect intelligence. It wasn't something that could be hidden. Thinking of that, Shirana and Koyomi exchanged glances and saw the helplessness reflected in each other's eyes. Suddenly, a soft clinking sound broke the silence, drawing their attention. The snowdrift wolf Schneewalzer stood still like a withered plant after frost, its blade quietly planted into the ground. The liveliness it displayed earlier when Lin had appeared had completely vanished. Yukina. Yukari looked at the snowdrift wolf with interest and murmured, "The snowdrift wolf. It feels like it's become more spiritual. Could it be because of Lin?" Yukari instinctively ruled out Yukina as the cause. As a master, she knew her apprentice too well. Thanks to this interruption, Shirana and Koyomi temporarily pushed aside some of their worries and turned their attention toward where Dimitri Vatler had vanished. Shirana said with concern, "If Dimitri Vatler dies here, won't the War King make a move?" Yukari shrugged. "So what? If he's got the guts, let him try talking to Lord Lin." "Right." Shirana blinked, then thought about it again. That made sense. Anyway, they now served Lord Lin. If the sky falls, someone taller will hold it up. Thinking from that perspective, it didn't seem so bad working under Lin. At the very least, when facing powerful forces, the Lion King organization could rely on Lin's influence. Of course, that was only if they did everything Lin instructed properly. Shirana clapped her hands. "All right. Our next mission is to gather all the information on the Flame Feast." Yukari rubbed her chin and said hesitantly, "I remember. There's still one body that hasn't awakened, right?" Koyomi nodded. "Yeah, No 12's resting place is still unknown. But she thought of Dimitri Vatler. Since he'd personally approached the Lion King organization about hosting the Flame Feast, that meant the warlord already knows the location of No 12. Koyomi looked confident. Shirana curled her lips. "Looks like we'll still have to deal with that old guy. But at least they had a lead now." The three of them discussed it a bit more before remembering Himuragi Yukina. Shirana looked at Yukina and asked cautiously, "Yukina, you now?" She wanted to ask about the changes in Yukina. Why had her power surged so much all of a sudden? And why had the snowdrift wolf changed too? Yukina remained silent for a moment before answering apologetically, "I'm sorry. I need to ask Master Lin first." Shirana paused, then nodded with a complicated expression. "That's reasonable." Dash. The world of the Soul Reapers. After receiving Yukina's message, Lin responded indifferently, "Whatever." It was a good opportunity for them to realize the benefits of becoming a peerage member. After replying to Yukina, Lin observed Kikyo and the others' actions in Hueco Mundo for a while, then returned to reality. There was something he needed to settle. Hell, hi. Lin went to find Kisuk Urahara and requested access to Hell. Though Urahara Kisuk was surprised, he still used the stabilizer to open the gate to Hell. Whoosh! As the portal opened, an eerie chill gushed out. Looking into Hell, Lin inwardly confirmed what he had sensed before. Ever since arriving in the world of the Soul Reapers, he had vaguely felt an inexplicable pull. And Lin knew very well, this pull came from Hell. Was it because of his identity as Yama? He had a faint guess. Without hesitation, he stepped into the gate of Hell. Seeing this, Yoryuki turned into a black cat and leapt into Lin's arms. Since Master is new to this world, let me guide you. She was quite curious about Lin's reason for heading to hell. Urahara Kisuk. A guide? If it were the Soul Society, then sure, Yoryuki was reliable. But hell? Even he had rarely visited that place, let alone Yoryuki. Lin glanced down at her without saying anything, then continued forward through the gate. Buzz. The moment he stepped into hell, a streak of white light flooded his vision, making his eyes sting slightly. Clang. The crisp sound of metal clashing echoed in his ears, gradually approaching. Yoryuki blinked, her blurry vision slowly adjusting. Then, what came into view was a space filled with white blocks. On them stood chained figures, staring lifelessly at Lin. These are... Yoryuki narrowed her eyes. Sinners. Lin gave them a brief glance. He didn't sense any powerful presences. He took another step forward, heading deeper into hell. Then the sinners suddenly moved. Yoryuki tensed instinctively. But their actions weren't what she expected. Instead of attacking, they all knelt down. As if they were worshipping their king? Yoryuki blinked again, doubt flashing in her eyes. Lin paused and watched them with interest. At the same time, a wave of information flooded into his mind. After a few seconds, clarity appeared in Lin's gaze. So that's how it is. Because of his identity as Yama, Hell had recognized him. That's why this scene was happening. Lin hadn't expected his Yama identity to have influence in other worlds too. As he thought, it was because of that identity that he had drawn Hell's attention. But Lin chuckled to himself. Hell's consciousness had a nice little plan, wanting him to work for it. That wasn't why he came here. He hadn't come to be acknowledged. Lin came to take control of Hell. He ignored the sinners and kept walking deeper. First floor. Second floor. All the way to the fourth floor. Along the way, he and Yoryuki encountered all sorts of strange sinners. The deeper they went, the more twisted and corrupt the sinners appeared. Aside from the blame beings, they also saw Hell's guardians, giant skeletal creatures with massive bodies. But without exception, every one of them knelt in reverence upon seeing Lin, as if welcoming their king's return. But Lin knew better. It was all an illusion created by Hell itself. Lin curled his lips. So you really want me to work for you? Suddenly, boom! A thunderous explosion interrupted him. Lin stopped, turning toward the source of the sound. Soon, a figure wearing a black cloak flew toward him in retreat. Coincidentally, they landed right in Lin's path. With a gentle wave of Lin's hand, the cloaked figure froze in midair, then dropped like a rock. Bang! They slammed into the white ground with a loud crash. Immediately after, a petite figure appeared, walking toward Lin from the distance. Oh! Seeing Lin, she let out a surprised sound, then grinned widely. Haha, two interesting newcomers have come to this boring place. Lin raised his eyes and saw a petite figure. She wore a Shinigami uniform with a sleeveless red captain's haori, had purple twin ponytails, and a black eye patch over her left eye. She carried a blade on her shoulder, exuding a fierce and arrogant aura. However, around her ankles were chains like those used on sinners, indicating her current status. Upon seeing this face, the golden vertical pupils of Yoryuki in Lin's arms widened abruptly. Sai Captain Sato. At the mention of her name, Sato Furofushi narrowed her eyes and looked toward the figure in Lin's arms. Ho ho ho, looks like we've got a little junior from Siraidai. Yoryuki had never imagined she'd run into a former captain-level figure in Hell. However, this captain didn't have a great reputation back in Siraidai. Yoryuki's expression turned somewhat solemn. Sato glanced at Yoryuki, sensed her spiritual pressure, then turned her attention to Lin. This man. She couldn't detect any spiritual pressure from him, but there was an overwhelming sense of danger. Also, Sato carefully examined both Lin and Yoryuki. No chains. Sato narrowed her eyes slightly, stuck out her tongue, and grinned wickedly. Did you enter Hell voluntarily? Lin ignored her, scanning the surroundings, then asked, are you the only Soul Reaper in Hell? TCH. Annoyed by being ignored, Sato sheathed her sword and responded coldly, there are plenty of Soul Reapers in Hell, but not many are as friendly as me. Lin nodded slightly at her words. Hey! Sato suddenly called out, I answered your question, now it's your turn to answer mine. Lin shrugged. Whether I came here voluntarily or not, don't you already know? Sato pursed her lips. Although she'd already guessed it based on the absence of chains, she still wanted confirmation. Ahem. Suddenly, a man in a tattered nightgown rose from the ground. He was hunched over and coughing up blood. Lin. Even someone in Hell can cough up blood? Sato looked down at him and smirked. Not bad, you're pretty durable. Upon hearing that, the man coughed up more blood, then glared at Sato with bloodshot eyes. Sato, don't go too far. Master Shuren sincerely invited you to join us in something great, and you actually. He had been beaten to a pulp, his face now swollen and unrecognizable. Just remembering it made his face twitch with fury. Something great. Sato snorted. You mean trying to break free from the shackles of hell? These fools were so naive. If it were that easy, why hasn't anyone escaped hell in the thousands of years since it was created? A bunch of short-sighted idiots. Still. If she could escape hell, she'd be more than happy. After all, hell was beyond boring. But she definitely wouldn't cooperate with someone like Shuren to do it. You'd better tell Shuren to give up. Do you think your strength is enough to destroy the gates of hell? Sato scoffed in disdain. But damn it! Murakumo clenched his teeth in frustration, only for Sato to swing her blade without hesitation and kill him again. However, Sato shook her head and muttered, this damn hell, not even killing someone feels satisfying. Because of hell's nature, souls trapped here could resurrect indefinitely. Even if she killed him 100 times, he would reappear like nothing happened. After handling him, Sato turned her gaze back to Lynn with renewed curiosity. This man had entered hell of his own will. She wanted to know his purpose. And more importantly, from the moment she laid eyes on him, hell had started warning her about something. It was only thanks to her immense spiritual pressure that she could suppress that feeling. This man. He seemed to be connected to hell in some way? That only made Sato more interested. Ah! Was something finally going to break the monotony of this place? Sato was thrilled, an evil grin forming as she licked her lips. You're Yuaki. No wonder this woman has such a terrible reputation. Hey! Sato raised her zanpakuto and asked, what's your name? Lynn, he replied calmly. Lynn. Sato repeated the name softly, then smiled. This must be your first time in hell, right? Lynn didn't confirm or deny it. In that case, let me be your guide through hell. Yoryuki. Why does that sound so familiar? Lynn gave Yoryuki a strange look, then nodded. Alright. I'm heading to the 5th level. Sato had been in hell for a while, so she was probably more reliable than Yoryuki in this place. Besides, Lynn glanced at the flickering evil piece and narrowed his eyes slightly. Well, she was a peerage-worthy talent. Letting her go would be a waste. After getting his answer, Sato chuckled, used flash step, and instantly moved far ahead of him. I'm fast, don't fall behind. She wanted to test Lynn's strength. Is that so? Suddenly, Lynn's voice echoed in Sato's ear. Her smile froze. Before she realized it, Lynn was standing right in front of her. He smiled. Coincidentally, I know a bit about speed too. Looking at Lynn's calm face, Sato gritted her teeth. This guy was definitely messing with her, wasn't he? She refused to believe it and used flash step again to increase the distance. But the result was the same. No matter how many times she moved first, Lynn always appeared in front of her before she even noticed. Sato bit her lip. Her instincts were right. This guy was seriously strong. Things were getting more and more interesting. Even though she was surprised by Lynn's speed, she admitted inwardly that she couldn't keep up. But that didn't mean she would give up. With stubborn determination, she used flash step again, pushing to win the next round. And so, in hell, the two figures moved one after the other, heading deeper into the abyss. At the same time, the 5th level of hell. A lava field. Blub blub. Suddenly, bubbles rose from the magma, and soon, Murakumo's figure emerged. He climbed up with a frustrated expression. Killed again. Suddenly, a gloating voice rang out. Murakumo looked up to see a plump man in pink. Taken, why are you here again? Taken ignored the question and simply said, let's go. Lord Shuren has been waiting for you. After a short while, Murakumo was brought before Shuren. Shuren didn't seem surprised to see Taken bring Murakumo back. He just sighed in his heart. Another failure. Sato Furofushi refused again. Why? Wouldn't it be better to work together to escape hell? Seeing the melancholy on Shuren's face, Murakumo suddenly spoke. Lord Shuren, although Sato Furofushi refused to join us this time, he thought of the man who had appeared earlier. There might be a new development in hell. Shuren paused and turned his gaze to Murakumo, raising his eyebrows. Explain. Yes. Murakumo lowered his head and described Lynn's appearance and traits. At first, Shuren didn't care. But the moment he heard that Lynn had no chains on, his eyes lit up. No chains. Under the guidance of Sato Furofushi, Lynn reached the 5th level in a short time. Upon entering the 5th floor, the scenery clearly differed from the upper levels. The colors were more vivid. Lava flowed in many places. Sato Furofushi crossed one arm in front of her chest while covering her nose with the other, muttering with disgust, "I really don't understand what you're doing here." The concentration of miasma on the 5th level of hell was so high that even she struggled to endure it. That's why she had always disliked this kind of environment. More than that, she shot a reluctant glance at Lynn. She had never been able to surpass him in speed, and that fact continued to gnaw at her. However, that also confirmed one thing for Sato Furofushi. Lynn was truly powerful. On the other side, Lynn ignored her and focused on observing the 5th floor. The miasma surrounding him had no effect at all. Still, he frowned slightly. This environment was far from suitable for the development of hell. Moreover, although the hell within the world of the Soul Reapers possessed a faint consciousness and a few basic rules, it was still too crude. There was no developmental potential. Hell needed a complete overhaul. For Lynn, this wasn't difficult. After all, he had already gained full control over the version of hell located in the Japan zone of the main world. All he had to do was replicate that hell template here. However, before that, he needed to find a method to obtain sovereign control over this world's hell. Otherwise, the benefits might just be absorbed by hell's consciousness. But, as Lin scanned the area, he found no specific anchor or artifact directly tied to hell's authority. So, how should one go about claiming hell's sovereignty? Lin stroked his chin, lost in thought. Suddenly, his crimson eyes lit up. While nothing tied directly to hell's authority could be found, the deeper he ventured, the more he felt a vague consciousness gradually becoming clearer. Yes, hell's consciousness. With that in mind, Lin closed his eyes and tried to establish contact with it. After a while, Lin frowned slightly. He could sense the existence of hell's consciousness, but connecting to it was proving difficult. Then, a flash of insight struck him. Since this was the world of the Soul Reapers, it made sense to use their power to communicate. Ryotsu. Realization dawned on Lin. After recruiting Yoryuki into his peerage, he had gained access to spiritual pressure, the energy unique to the Soul Reaper world. However, due to his unique constitution, Ryotsu didn't manifest as his primary energy. That was why Sato Furofushi hadn't sensed it from him earlier. As a devil, his main energy was magic. Spiritual pressure was simply an attribute layered onto his existing power. Lin calmed himself and converted his internal energy into spiritual pressure. The next moment, a terrifying burst of Ryotsu exploded from the depths of hell. Boom! A dazzling beam of light shot skyward. It instantly tore through the thick miasma clouding hell. The entire realm began to quake violently. Lying in Lin's arms, Yoryuki's expression shifted. This spiritual pressure was even more terrifying than the old man's. Sato Furofushi stood frozen. The force of the spiritual pressure whipped her long purple hair wildly. Her oversized shiakusho flapped violently in the wind. She stared in stunned silence at the spiraling column of energy erupting from Lin and swallowed hard. At that moment, Sato Furofushi no longer cared about why she hadn't sensed spiritual pressure on Lin before. This level of spiritual pressure. Gulp. The sound of swallowing echoed from her throat. After their previous speed contest, she had already elevated Lin's strength to a nearly mythical level in her mind. But now, no one had told her that this guy was more terrifying than even Yamamoto. Had she been in hell too long? Had she completely lost track of the current power scale? In this world, when did such a monstrous figure appear? The eruption of Lin's spiritual pressure didn't just shake Yoryuki and Sato Furofushi. In a distant corner of hell. This spiritual pressure. His eyes were filled with fear as he clenched his fists tightly. At the same time, Shuren abruptly stood up from his seat, staring at the origin of the spiritual pressure with disbelief. What terrifying spiritual pressure! So, hell could shake. Feeling the tremor beneath his feet, Shuren was deeply shocked. He'd been in hell for who knew how many years, but this was the first time he'd seen something like this. Ha! His breathing grew ragged. Such a terrifying existence might actually be able to break the gates of hell. Shuren's shock only lasted a few seconds before he snapped back to reality. Escape from hell. That had always been his goal. And in his estimation, the only way out was to shatter the gates of hell. But, with his power alone, that was impossible. That was why he had always tried to rope in Sato Furofushi. Yet, even with immortality, Shuren had no confidence he could break the gate. Now, however, finally, someone gave him hope. Shuren raised his hand. Let's go. It's time we paid our respects to this mighty being who descended into hell. As soon as he spoke, Shuren stepped forward. Murakumo and the others exchanged uncertain glances. This overwhelming spiritual pressure was terrifying, but would someone like that really help them break the gates of hell? Doubt clouded their expressions. In the end, it was Taken who broke the silence. Lord Shuren. He hesitated, then asked, would someone like that even be willing to help us? Oh. Shuren chuckled, then replied with confidence, don't worry. Once I make my move, there's no goal I can't achieve. Murakumo's expression twitched slightly. No unachievable goals? Then why did Sato Furofushi reject them? Ah. Right. Shuren hadn't personally stepped in before. Despite the unease, Shuren had spoken. So, after another round of glances, the group sighed in resignation and followed him. And that wasn't all. The impact of Lin's spiritual pressure eruption continued to spread. Soul Society. Connected to Hell. Click. The gates of Hell, which had been silent for many years, suddenly trembled. A thin line of data appeared across the seal. Soon. Thick miasma surged out. A Soul Reaper standing guard had been half asleep, but when he saw this, he jolted upright. He stared at the miasma and shouted, quick, notify the Captain Commander. Soon. An urgent report reached Siraidii. Inside the central building of the Godii 13. The captains had all gathered. Yamamoto Genri Yusai Shijikuni sat at the head. Once everyone was present, he said in a low voice, it seems something has occurred in Hell. Hell. Hearing the word, the captains were visibly surprised. Then their expressions turned grim. As captains, they knew well how dangerous Hell was to the balance of the three realms. Yamamoto Genri Yusai remained calm, though he was quietly pleased by their reactions. He continued, I intend to send a team into Hell to investigate. Who among you volunteers? As Yamamoto Genri Yusai finished speaking, the entire meeting room fell into brief silence. A disturbance in Hell was undoubtedly serious. But it was also troublesome. None of the captains seemed eager to volunteer. Except one. Hell, hi. Kenpei Kazaraki sat slouched in his seat, his expression wild. Sounds like there might be something worth cutting down in there. Old man Yamamoto, just let me go. Yamamoto Genri Yusai gave him a glance, then ignored him. He continued calmly, no one else is volunteering. Kenpei. He slapped the floor in frustration. Hey. I said I'd go. Kuratsuka Mayuri let out a laugh. You're not seriously sending a researcher like me to that kind of place, are you? Yamamoto didn't expect anything from him either. Instead, his eyes turned to Kiraku Shinsui. Kiraku, who had been slacking off, paused for a moment. Scratching his head lazily, he replied, wouldn't this sort of thing be better left to the more specialized second division? After all, the cause of the incident in Hell was unclear. It made more sense to let the more professional second division investigate. Of course. All of this was just an excuse to avoid taking the mission. Swafon. The new captain really had no authority. No. It was worse. She was stuck in a role where she couldn't speak up but was expected to work. She wasn't as old as the veterans, but more capable than most newcomers. Basically born to be a workhorse. She sighed, then straightened her posture and said seriously, in that case, I'll go. Yamamoto Genri Yusai looked at her silently for a moment, then nodded. Very well. I'll leave it to you. Soon after, the decision was finalized. The second division quickly mobilized. Gate of Hell. Swafon and her squad approached. She frowned at the miasma surging out, then produced her mission certificate and said coldly, open the gate. Clang. Moments later, the gates of Hell opened completely. Whoosh. Unhindered, the miasma poured out even more violently, like it had found an escape route. Seeing this, Swafon was the first to step into the gate. Meanwhile, fifth level of Hell. Lynn suppressed his overwhelming spiritual pressure. He began using it to communicate directly with Hell. Soon. He captured a faint consciousness. Lynn attempted to establish communication. But there was no response. Hell's consciousness. It didn't seem fully developed. So, was all of this just its instinct? Did it instinctively recognize Lynn as a Yama and believe he could help it develop? Lynn smirked at the thought. He wondered if Hell's consciousness had ever heard the phrase letting a wolf into the house. Then he forced his way deeper into Hell's consciousness. Buzz. Hell's awareness suddenly flared up, and the entire realm trembled violently. Sato Furofushi. What's going on? Her expression tensed. Why did Hell's reaction grow even more intense after Lynn suppressed his spiritual pressure? Hell's consciousness began resisting instinctively. But Lynn sent it a message. You don't want Hell to be trapped in a corner of the world, scrounging for scraps left behind by others, do you? Hell's awareness suddenly stilled. The struggle ceased. Really now? Lynn looked a little surprised. Was it that easy to convince? He actually felt a little sorry for it. But that didn't mean he'd hold back. He seized control of Hell immediately. However, locked. Lynn furrowed his brow slightly. He now had control over Hell, just not full control. Hell's consciousness made a deal with him. It would hand itself over completely to Lynn, but only if it saw real development. This thing was sincerely devoted to hell. Its purity made even Lynn feel a little ashamed. Well, briefly. After finishing the negotiation, Lynn opened his eyes. Sato Furofushi was right in front of him, blinking with curiosity. Seeing him awaken, she asked, "Did you do something just now?" Lynn nodded. "Just made a deal with hell." Sato Furofushi. Hell? A deal? She understood the words individually, but together, they didn't make sense. A deal with hell? Is that even possible? She was full of doubt. She had lived in hell for so long, yet never heard of such a thing. Lynn tilted his head. Could it be? You're just not qualified. The corner of her eye twitched. You mean? I'm not worthy. Lynn nodded meaningfully. Ha! Sato let out a heavy breath. Not worthy? Well, it might actually be true. Thinking of Lynn's spiritual pressure far more terrifying than Yamamoto's, she clicked her tongue. She had no reason to doubt him anymore. I didn't expect you to be that strong, she muttered in awe. And she was curious. What kind of deal had Lynn made with hell? Even Yamamoto and Squad Zero couldn't intervene here. Yet the man before her had done exactly that. Her adrenaline spiked. This was getting interesting. Unable to suppress her curiosity, she asked, "So, what kind of deal did you make with hell?" "Nothing much," Lynn replied casually. "I'll help it develop. In return, hell will be mine." Ownership of hell? Wait a minute. Sato's eyes widened. Hell will belong to you. You develop it, and then it becomes yours? Was that even a deal? Why did it sound like Lynn got everything? And hell, agreed? Lynn simply shrugged. Sato was speechless. She had a strange feeling. Hell might not be very smart. But despite that, it had kept her bound here all this time. Thinking about it, she sighed deeply. After calming herself, she asked again, "So, what are you going to do?" "Developing hell." She wanted in on something that interesting. "First," Lynn said, "let's shake hands." Sato looked confused. Under her puzzled gaze, Lynn raised his hand and waved. A portal instantly formed before them. Lynn locked onto coordinates and connected to the hell in Japan from the main world. Soon, through the dimensional gate, a field of red spider lilies came into view. In the center of the red bloom stood a small thatched hut, quietly nestled in the scene. This is... Sato's eyes narrowed in surprise. Beyond the portal, it almost looked like a connection between hell and the Soul Society. But her understanding was still limited. That place was actually another world's hell. Naturally, Lynn didn't explain. At the same time, main world, in the hell of Japan, Ainma sensed the sudden change. The moment she saw the gate open through the field of red spider lilies, a question mark formed in her mind. Before she could react, she saw Lynn. Lord Lynn. Main world. Japan, hell's domain. Sato Furofushi followed behind Lynn, looking up at the sea of red spider lilies as she arrived at the thatched hut beside the crystal-clear spring. Her purple hair swayed with every step, and her uncovered eye darted around, curiously surveying her surroundings. At the same time, she used her spiritual pressure to sense the environment and the energy in the air. Confirmed. This definitely wasn't the hell she had lived in. In fact, Sato narrowed her eyes slightly. This might not even be her world. That realization stunned her. But there was undeniably strong energy in the air. However, Sato was certain there wasn't a trace of spirit particles. No matter how she scanned the atmosphere, it was empty of the spirit particles she relied on. This was the first time she had ever encountered something like this. Meanwhile, Yoriyuki, who lay lazily in Lynn's arms in her cat form, stretched her head and looked around. A strange light flickered in her golden, vertical pupils. Wasn't this the other world mentioned in the manual? Compared to Sato, who was utterly clueless, Yoriyuki already understood exactly where they were. After all, she had personally seen Lynn activate a portal and cross into the world of the Soul Reapers. So, it was only natural that there'd be another world on the other side of the gate, right? Outside the thatched hut. When Ainma and the others saw Lynn return, they all bowed respectfully and greeted, "Master Lynn." Lynn nodded, but didn't issue any tasks immediately. Instead, he asked, "What's the current situation in hell?" Ainma, her expression blank and eyes as lifeless as ever, answered in a mechanical tone, "Thanks to the Dog Demon clan, hell is now operating smoothly." As she spoke, she waved her hand, and an image projection appeared. Compared to the barren state it had been in when Lynn first came to hell, there were now far more boats traveling the waters. Each boat carried a soul. Though it was hell, the scene strangely gave off a sense of life and order. Hell was thriving. Ainma pointed at the projection and added, Hell is in the process of reclaiming soul-reaping operations in Japan. So far, we've made some progress, but..." She paused. Her tone became hesitant. Lynn raised an eyebrow. "What's the issue?" The Honana stepped in and continued, "Because we've taken back control of soul management in Japan, several other mythological underworlds have started protesting. The Miss has received a bunch of complaint letters." Lynn's expression twitched. "Complaint letters? Just ignore them. He had merely reclaimed what rightfully belonged to Japan's hell. And they had the nerve to complain? Besides, if they had the strength to do something about it, AI and Ma wouldn't be getting letters, they'd have tried force. They were just noisy pests." "Understood." AI and Ma nodded without any change in her expression. Honana sighed in relief. Having a boss like Lynn behind them really made everything easier. She wasn't the only one who thought that. Compared to the chaotic, underhanded methods that Hell used in Japan to keep functioning, serving under Lynn was far more straightforward and effective. On the other side, Yoriyuki and Sato were completely dumbfounded listening to the conversation. "Wait a second." Sato asked in confusion, "This place is also Hell?" Honana looked at her like it was obvious. Sato rubbed her temples. "Confirmed. This really was another world." So there are hells in other worlds too. That kind of makes sense? But why does this hell look so different from hers?" Sato looked around again. "Red spider lilies, clean springs. This is hell?" Compared to that, her version of hell was basically garbage. All it had was grey blocks and lava. Pointless and boring. She nearly got injured out of sheer boredom. But here, this hell had scenery, order, and style. She mentally compared the two environments and started to get annoyed about how terrible her old hell was. Wait. Was she forgetting something? Clink. Suddenly, a crisp sound came from beneath her. Sato looked down. The chain on her ankle was glinting coldly. Her eyes widened. Crap. She forgot sinners aren't supposed to leave hell. Sato's heart tightened. Her entire body tensed. She just wandered off like that? This was the end, wasn't it? Her brain froze. If hell found out? Wait. A sudden thought flashed through her mind. This world's hell was powerful. Maybe they had the power to override her own? With that idea in mind, Sato relaxed a little. But she realized something else. This wasn't her world. Lynn had no reason to keep her here. Unless... Back to Lynn. After getting updated on Japan's hell, Lynn moved on to the situation in the world of the Soul Reapers. Upon hearing his report, Honana's expression turned odd. So, a new hell. As expected of Yama, he conquered another hell in no time. But wasn't this a bit too fast? This hell just got stabilized. Now he wanted to manage a second one? Also, there'd definitely be another manpower issue. Just have Inyakamai bring all her people to the new hell. Inyakamai. Inyakamai looked a bit confused when she received the message, but still rushed over. And when she got there, she saw something that made her fur bristle. In Lynn's arms. When did another thieving cat show up? Inyakamai's golden eyes locked onto Yoriyuki, overflowing with hostility. Yoriyuki tensed up slightly. This woman. What's with the food-guarding behavior? But before she could get nervous, Inyakamai's hostility suddenly vanished. Inyakamai sniffed the air, a puzzled look in her eyes. No scent of a cat. She frowned. Some kind of transformation spell. But she suddenly stepped closer to Yoriyuki and said coldly, "Why don't you turn into a dog instead?" Hi. Yoriyuki's eyes widened, stunned. Lynn burst into laughter and casually lifted Inyakamai by the back of her neck. Inyakamai let out a little grunt, clamping her legs together in silence. Yoriyuki. This dog. What's going on? She was completely lost. But she had to admit, the variety of species in this place was kind of amazing. Later, Lynn briefly outlined the plans for the Soul Reaper world's hell. One word. Copy. There was already a successful operation model here. There was no need to rebuild everything from scratch. As for her manpower, Inyakamai looked like she was in pain. Understood. In the main world, working in hell was considered a good job, but in another world? She wasn't sure. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Good thing she'd told Sesshomaru about this earlier. At least the dog demon clan wasn't completely wiped out. Maybe it was time to send them to the other world to mine resources or something. After briefly discussing the development of the new hell, Lynn and his group began preparing to return to the hell of the world of the Soul Reapers. Since the new hell still required attention, AI Inma and her group were also preparing to travel to the Soul Reaper world. They brought along a pack of dog demons who had already formed a structured group. As for Inyakamai, she needed to return to the Warring States era to gather additional forces. After a short while, Just as Lin and the others were preparing to pass through the gate, they noticed that Sato Furofushi seemed hesitant. Lin raised an eyebrow. What's wrong? Sato Furofushi gave an awkward smile and mumbled, could I? No. Hey. Sato placed one hand on her waist and complained, I haven't even said anything yet. Lin shrugged. No matter what you were going to ask, I'm under no obligation to agree. That does sound logical. But still. Then think of it as a reward for being your guide. Lin gave her a strange look. I have already paid you a reward. Sato blinked. When? Lin responded calmly, otherwise, why do you think I let you follow us? Sato's eyes widened. Wait, seriously. She hadn't even agreed. Well, it's not like saying no would have stopped her. Sato bit her lip. Alright. She had no more excuses. Now what? Lin just looked at her quietly, though his eyes flickered with amusement. After a while, Sato sighed, looking dejected. If I go back now and hell finds me, I'll definitely be punished. Death wouldn't worry her. She was immortal. She wasn't even afraid of being dunked in molten lava. But her punishment was imprisonment. That was worse than dying. She wouldn't be allowed to go anywhere. Of course, if it were her previous hell, then fine. There was nothing fun there anyway. But now, after witnessing everything interesting happening here, now that she finally found some excitement, she didn't want to miss out. Hell, hi. Lin understood what she meant. But wasn't he the one in charge of the Hell in the Soul Reaper world now? Dealing with Hell was easier than dealing with people. Still, Lin didn't say that outright and instead replied, yeah, Hell can be pretty inhumane. Right. Sato nodded eagerly, then said expectantly, so, how about letting me stay here? Lin replied without hesitation, no. Sato. You're one to talk about being inhumane. Lin gave her a slight smile. I'm not obligated to help you. Sato pouted. But then Lin added, of course, if you become mine, that's a different story. Sato. She gave him a look that clearly said, so that's the kind of person you are. Oh, trying to take advantage of me, huh? Just say so. Puffing up proudly, she drew her Zanpakuto and declared, fight me. If you win, you can do whatever you want with me. She had spent enough time with Lin to understand just how powerful he was. But there was no way Sato would just submit and become his subordinate for nothing. So they had to fight first. Knowing she was no match for Lin, she made the first move. In a flash, she appeared in front of him and swung her sword. Lin's expression remained calm. He simply raised his hand. Boom. Sato felt a sharp pain across her face. Everything went dark and she crashed straight into the sea of red spider lilies. Sato. What just happened? She was momentarily stunned. But quickly snapped out of it and began to resist. Boom. Her spiritual pressure erupted. Her long purple hair flared upward. The surrounding spider lilies were caught in the force, their petals fluttering like butterflies. Yoryuki's gaze sharpened. As expected of a well-known senior, her spiritual pressure alone was far stronger than her own. But still, Yoryuki's expression was complicated. Even so, Sato remained motionless, clearly suppressed. On the ground, Sato also sensed something was wrong. Even after unleashing her full spiritual pressure, the oppressive weight on her didn't decrease. If anything, it got heavier. Panic started to rise. Lin squatted down and placed one hand on her back, pinning her in place. Are you done? Sato. Lin raised an eyebrow. He couldn't understand a word she was saying. Oh well, I'll just take that as a yes. Lin let go. The pressure around her, especially on her head, eased immediately. Sato slowly lifted her head and stared blankly at Lin's feet. Huff. She let out a deep breath. But there was a lingering sense of frustration. That was it. She didn't even get a chance to breathe. She didn't even use her Bankai. But with this kind of overwhelming power, even using Bankai wouldn't have changed anything. Thinking this, Sato pouted, stood up, and brushed off the dirt and red spider lily pollen on her clothes. After tidying up, she looked at Lin and pouted. Fine. I belong to you now. What a humiliating loss. She lowered her head in frustration. Meanwhile, a human-like expression appeared on Yoryuki's cat face. That was fast. But seeing that even a veteran like Sato couldn't take a single hit from Lin, Yoryuki felt oddly reassured. Ainma and the others didn't react much. They quietly waited for Lin to finish handling things. Seeing that Sato had kept her word, Lin handed her the admission manual. Sato accepted it, confused. What's this? You'll understand once you read it. Yoryuki's eyes lit up with understanding. Yup, that's the process. Sato flipped open the manual and was instantly stunned by what she saw. Her eyes widened as if she had never seen the world before, completely absorbed by the contents. After a while, she murmured in a daze, "So, this is what you meant by becoming yours. Join the peerage." Sato clutched the admission manual tightly. This, actually looked kind of fun. Excitement flashed in her eyes. Conquering other worlds. What hooked her wasn't the devil transformation or the blessing system. It was the chance to fight in another world. Exciting. Really, really exciting. Of course. The blessing system was also interesting. And she did want to grow stronger. But that wasn't what mattered most to her. This was enough. After reading through the manual, she snapped it shut. Without any hesitation, and with clear excitement in her voice, she declared, "I want to join your peerage." Another world. A whole other world. Sato was screaming internally with joy. It wasn't just this one. His peerage spanned across multiple different worlds. And they were still searching for new ones to invade and conquer. Just like her own world. Sato had read that part of the manual very carefully. On the side, Honana wasn't surprised by Sato's decision. She simply shrugged and said, "Looks like our trip to the new hell is delayed again." Main world, Japan's hell. Inside the hut, Sato Furofushi lay on her stomach on the wooden bed, her back exposed. She had read the manual and understood the reincarnation process, but she still grumbled, "Why does this so-called reincarnation ceremony require me to take off my clothes?" Lynn didn't respond. He simply raised his hand, condensed an evil piece, and approached her. Feeling Lynn's growing aura, Sato Furofushi tried to act nonchalant, but she couldn't suppress her nervousness. "Hey! Don't try anything weird just because you've got the chance." Lynn was speechless. She was already part of his peerage. Everything of hers belonged to him, yet she was still worried about something like this? Besides. Lynn glanced at her and curled his lips, disinterested. "I'm not into child-sized bodies." Sato's eyes widened in disbelief. Child. She couldn't let that slide. She sat up, turned around to face Lynn, puffed out her chest, and put her hands on her hips. "Who are you calling a child?" She slapped her chest several times, producing a series of crisp smacks. "Lynn." He glanced at the modest curve, then nodded with a complicated look. "Well, definitely better, barely. Just barely better." Sato wanted to argue, but before she could say anything, she suddenly felt herself being lifted off the bed. Looking up at Lynn with a puzzled expression, she was promptly turned back around and pressed down again. The next moment, a cold sensation touched her back, making her shiver. Then, a power completely different from spiritual pressure surged into her body. Buzz. Her spiritual pressure and magic began to intertwine, the energy inside her body boiling and surging violently. But what surprised Sato was, despite being entirely different types of energy, there was no rejection or collapse. Instead, they merged seamlessly. Sato had a guess. Within her body, the evil piece shone brightly. Evil piece. Sato silently recited the name. Maybe it was this piece that made it possible. Also, even though she had been reincarnated as a devil, her core traits as a soul reaper remained. In other words, she now possessed both the powers of a soul reaper and a devil? And not just that. There were many other strange new things inside her. Sato Furofushi carefully examined the changes in her body. At the same time, a system notification rang in Lynn's ears. Ding! You have obtained the immortality of peerage member, Sato Furofushi. Ding! Your peerage member, Sato Furofushi, has been reincarnated as a special type devil. Lynn's gaze remained on her glowing back. A burst of light flashed, followed by an information panel appearing before him. Dash. Name, Sato Furofushi. Rank, Ultimate Class Devil. Class, Knight. Race, Devil. Master, Lynn Valifor. Stats. Strength, I0. Agility, I0. Endurance, I0. Magic, I0. Class Skills. Super Speed. Innate Abilities. Zanpakuto, Blood-Devouring Shijur. First Release, Pact of Eternal Reign. Release Phrase, Suck Up Eternity, Blood-Devouring Shijur. Abilities. Blood Silk, the blade transforms into a flowing blood-like liquid, which can extend freely into whips or thorns. Wounds inflicted continue to drain spiritual pressure. The loss is proportional to the enemy's obsession with life. Pathological Drain, by contacting the enemy's blood, she can temporarily absorb their vitality to recover. Excessive absorption may cause her to enter a frenzy. Bankai, Rotten Bone and Blood Shijur, Yacho Coffin. Shijur Burial, enemies marked with blood gradually mummify, their flesh rotting away. Pain is delayed. Price of Immortality, Sato ages alongside the effect but can reverse the decay by draining blood continuously. Undead Devil. Super Speed Regeneration. Instant regeneration of body and soul. Ignores physical destruction, beheading, dismemberment, and energy-based attacks. Keto, 0. Requires magic or absorbed vitality. Avatar proliferation. Summon up to 8 physical avatars, each sharing her immortality. Can act independently or merge into an immortal field. Numerological grafting. Transfer her injuries to enemies or the environment via touch. For example, she can graft a severed arm wound onto the enemy, infecting them with an undead curse that suppresses regeneration. Devil transformation, constant truth. Maintains a devilified state. Development skills. Battle continuation, A can continue fighting even near death. Converts pain into combat power. Ryotsu perception, B detects enemy spiritual pressure and anticipates movement paths. Dash. Lynn read through her blessing details. The first thing he noticed was her Zanpakuto, blood-devouring Shijir. Just based on its effects, it perfectly fits Sato's immortality theme. Then he focused on the main trait. Undead Devil. Lynn repeated the name in his mind. Just the word undead made his expectations rise. Sure enough. The first trait was super speed regeneration. Ordinary devils could use magic to heal, but the effect was limited. That's why healing magic and artifacts existed. But now, with this ability, Lynn's survival tools had stepped up another level. Of course, with his current power, even in the main world, few could pose a threat. Still, it was better to be prepared. He wouldn't always be in the main world. If devil's summoning pulled him into an even more dangerous world, he'd have more options. Besides that, the other abilities were impressive too. Numerological grafting reminded Lynn of Haiden from Naruto. But this was far more refined. She wouldn't harm herself. She could transfer the damage to others or even the surrounding environment. That was insane. Transferring damage to the environment? Just imagining Sato in combat was enough to paint a terrifying picture. Of course. It still required magic. After copying her profile, Lynn lightly tapped her back. Sato snapped out of her trance, having been absorbed in analyzing her new body. Lynn handed her the blessing information. Undead Devil, hi. So this was the true change in her body? Reading through the ability description, a look of realization crossed Sato's face. That vague, hazy feeling in her mind vanished. Although, was the name of the skill derived from her name? Her expression turned a little odd. Once she familiarized herself with her new powers, Lynn said, "Let's go to the new hell." Hi. Sato blinked, then grabbed Lynn's clothes anxiously. But if someone like me, who escaped from hell, gets discovered. Before she could finish, Lynn raised his hand and interrupted her. Hell is mine now. I make the rules. Sato Furofushi. World of the Soul Reapers. Hell. Lynn was the first to step through the boundary gate. Ainma and the others followed closely behind, taking in the new hell's environment. Once most of the group had entered, even the Panther clan had crossed through. Sato Furofushi finally peeked through cautiously. After a moment's hesitation, she grit her teeth and stepped through. She took several deep breaths, blinking as she scanned the surroundings. As expected, there was no sense of being targeted by hell. So, was what Lynn said actually true? This hell was now under Lynn's control? Then, what was the point of her selling herself to him earlier? Sato Furofushi narrowed her eyes and glared resentfully at Lynn. But no one cared. Honana took a few breaths, then immediately pinched her nose in disgust. Isn't the air in this hell absolutely awful? Yoryuki explained, this place is filled with hell miasma. The air quality is naturally terrible. Once they became somewhat familiar with the environment, Ainma and the others quickly put together a development plan. Using the main world's hell as a blueprint, it wasn't difficult at all. Before long, Ainma handed the plan to Lynn for approval. Lynn reviewed it as Ainma narrated. With her calm, flat tone, it sounded like a student reading aloud in class. Still, as he listened to her methodical explanation, Lynn nodded in satisfaction. But Ainma eventually paused, then added, hell needs souls to develop. In other words, the former mechanism, where souls either committed extreme crimes or were passively assigned here from the Soul Society, was completely inadequate. If they wanted real progress, they had to be proactive. Only a continuous stream of souls could sustain a functioning hell. In short, they needed to reap. But this would inevitably conflict with local powers. The Soul Society. The Soul Reapers. Guiding souls to the Soul Society was their job. If hell started doing the same, conflict was guaranteed. Still, just follow your plan, Lynn said calmly. Soul Society? With Lynn's current strength, he had no reason to care. Even Yamamoto Genri Yusai Shijikuni, the so-called strongest Soul Reaper in 1,000 years, wasn't worth his concern. With Lynn's approval, Ainma grew more confident and assertive. Lynn also sent a simplified version of the plan to Hell's consciousness. Not long after, Hell's consciousness responded instantly. Like an inexperienced girl being shown candy for the first time, she was completely entranced by Lynn's plan and quickly handed over full authority to him. Her tone practically shouted, "Go ahead. I fully support you." Seeing this, Lynn couldn't help but chuckle. This was probably the first time he'd encountered a consciousness this gullible. Well, actually, wasn't this his first time communicating directly with a consciousness at all? Lynn rubbed his chin. He figured this kind of encounter would become more frequent in the future. After all, if Hell had consciousness, there was no reason entire worlds couldn't as well. Hopefully, they'd all be as easy to deal with as this one. Of course, Lynn wasn't lying either. He did plan to develop Hell properly. Just as the plan was being finalized and the Panther clan was preparing to begin full-scale transformation work, a group of uninvited guests arrived. Oh, how rare! A tall figure hovered in the sky, arms crossed as he surveyed the scene in amazement. When did Hell become so lively? Sato Furofushi narrowed her eyes and muttered, "Shuren, what are you doing here?" His sudden appearance didn't stir much reaction. After all, everyone had already sensed his spiritual energy approaching before he got close. Shuren was slightly surprised to see Sato Furofushi present. So, the one who released that overwhelming pressure earlier was her? That checked out. Hell had been stable for years. If a strong individual was hiding here, he would have sensed it already. Relax. I'm not here for you this time. Shuren declared he had lost interest in her. TCH. Sato snorted in disdain. Everyone in Hell knew what kind of person Shuren was. Although she hadn't understood at first, Sato figured it out quickly. It was likely because of the spiritual pressure Lynn released earlier. This poor fool probably mistook it for a sign of hope. But what would his face look like if he found out the person he was seeking was actually the CEO of Hell now? The corners of Sato's mouth curled into a smirk. Still, there was no need to let him bother Lynn. Perfect time to test her new powers. With that in mind, Sato drew her Zanpakuto and grinned wickedly. I don't care what you're here for. You had your people harass me for so long. That debt. It's time to settle it. As soon as the words left her lips, Sato vanished like a shadow. Combining flash step with her night-class super speed, her velocity reached another level entirely. Shuren's pupils contracted sharply as he felt a violent gust at his side. He instinctively raised his arms in defense, but boom! His entire body was slammed down from the sky into the ground. Lord Shuren! Taken and the others who had come with him shouted in shock. This woman! Was she always this strong and just holding back? Actually, that was true. Someone like Shuren wasn't even worth Sato's time to release her Zanpakuto. Still, the fact that Shuren couldn't react at all was also due to her power boost. Without night-level speed, that flash step wouldn't have achieved the same result. On the ground, Shuren quickly got up, ignoring the dust and simply stared upward, frowning at Sato in disbelief. This woman! Was she really this strong? That speed! Whew! Shuren exhaled and forced himself to stay calm. He wasn't here to fight. He came to form an alliance. He had a clear purpose. He was about to speak when Sato vanished again. Shuren tensed. His eyes twitched. This crazy woman again. Without hesitation, he released his spiritual pressure. Whoosh! Flames coiled around him like serpents. Sensing movement in the air, the fire snakes lashed out viciously in that direction. Shuren smirked coldly. Don't forget, Sato. I've been in this hell much longer than you. Boom! The flames struck Sato head-on. But, to Shuren's shock, she didn't dodge. Instead, she charged straight into the flames. Whoosh! The fire wrapped around her, scorching and carbonizing her skin, but she was laughing. Shuren's heart shuddered. Even in hell, where death wasn't permanent, the pain was still real. She really was insane. Bang! Suddenly, a charred hand reached out from within the flames and clamped down hard on Shuren's shoulder. Numerological grafting. Numerological grafting. Shuren heard Sato Furofushi's voice and paused. Before he could react, a searing sensation exploded across his entire body. Green smoke curled up from his skin, and the smell of cooked flesh hit his nose. A moment later, pain surged through his body. His skin began to blacken and char, as though set on fire. GHH. Shuren gritted his teeth in agony, eyes full of disbelief. What the hell was going on? He endured the pain and looked at Sato's hand still resting on his shoulder. Then, he saw something even more bewildering. Sato's charred skin was turning pale again? Wait a minute. Shuren's eyes narrowed. He had a theory. He immediately backed away from Sato Furofushi. But the pain didn't fade. His skin still burned. He would never have imagined that, as someone who specialized in flame attacks, he'd one day suffer from being burned by fire. How? It was like, he was the one engulfed in flames now. And Sato? She clearly wasn't even affected by the attack. Shuren stared at her. So, did she do it on purpose? Was this connected to what he was experiencing? Just as he began piecing it together, Sato's cheerful voice rang out from within the fire. Hey! Shuren's eyelid twitched uncontrollably. Sato continued in a playful tone, this temperature's too low. Should we go borrow some from old man Yamamoto? She sounded genuinely disappointed. This wasn't enough to test the limits of numerological grafting. What she wanted was to see if she could transfer fatal damage. But Shuren was too weak. Old man Yamamoto? Yamamoto Genryu Saishiji-kuni? Shuren's lips twitched, the pain almost forgotten for a second. She was comparing him to the captain commander of the Soul Society? Ha! What a joke! Still. Sato's carefree tone made him suspicious again. Was this woman really treating his flames like a hot spring? Even if he wasn't on Yamamoto's level, it shouldn't be this bad, right? Grimacing, Shuren cut off the flames. The next moment, Sato's figure emerged from the fire. Shuren's eyes widened slightly. She was completely unharmed. And, as the flames vanished, so did the burning pain in his body. His eyes narrowed. So all that damage earlier was his? He'd taken the full brunt of it in her place? After a quick mental calculation, Shuren arrived at a terrifying conclusion. So, Sato's ability numerological grafting really let her transfer damage to him? While he stood frozen, Sato planted one hand on her hip and casually held her Zanpakuto in the other. Hey, do you have anything stronger? Hurry up and use it. Shuren stayed silent. If he was right, then attacking Sato meant hurting himself? What kind of shameless, absurd ability was this? He glanced at the smug grin on her face. Absolutely shameless. He opened his mouth to speak. Sato Furofushi, I'm here too. Too bad. He was dealing with Sato Furofushi. She frowned and instantly vanished. Before Shuren could finish, she appeared in front of him and slashed. He had no choice but to shut up and defend. But, because of what he just realized, Shuren didn't dare counterattack at all. Off to the side, Taken and the others watched in stunned silence. Shuren, the same arrogant, self-important figure they followed, was now getting beat down and running away like a coward. Was this really Lord Shuren? Could he really lead them out of hell? Doubt began creeping into their hearts. Meanwhile, Sato looked at Shuren's pathetic attempts to dodge and snorted. You're the one who wanted to escape hell. Shuren didn't answer. He just kept dodging her relentless attacks. Sato curled her lip in disappointment. She could already tell he'd guessed part of her ability. But so what? After their earlier exchange, a connection had already formed through numerological grafting. From now on, as long as she wished, she could freely shift any damage she took to Shuren. In fact, she could even hurt herself and send it all to him. Wait. Sato's eyes suddenly sparkled. That's it. This was the right way to use numerological grafting. Mark first, then. She stopped swinging her blade. Shuren noticed and frowned. Though confused, he was relieved she'd stopped. But what happened next made his heart stop. Wait. He raised a trembling hand. What are you about to do? Surely not. Sato paused, then gave him a bright, gentle smile. Then stabbed herself in the chest. Squelch. She blinked. There was no pain. But, ugh. Across from her, Shuren buckled, legs trembling as a gaping wound tore open over his heart. The pain of having his heart pierced racked his body. Blood gushed out as he clutched his chest, eyes wide in horror as he stared at Sato. It was true. Every bit of damage Sato took was reflected onto him. Ridiculous. What kind of absurd ability was this? Sato narrowed her eyes, staring at him like she'd just discovered a new toy. She glanced at her own body, as if deciding where to stab next. Shuren, sensing her twisted glee, panicked. Without hesitation, he forcefully compressed his spiritual energy. This woman. She was a total pervert. There was no way he'd keep entertaining this. Boom. Shuren exploded in a burst of spiritual pressure. Self-destruction. As long as he was in hell, he could be resurrected. Better to die than to keep getting tormented by Sato's bizarre ability. Taken. Wait, what about us? To be continued.